Hi everyone. Tonight, we ease into a slow walk through a very different kind of cold. The kind that seeps into your boots, your breath, and the thin timber walls you lean against. Picture yourself stepping onto the open prairie at dusk, with the final strands of pink light slipping beneath heavy clouds. The horizon feels so vast you could almost fall into it. The air bites, carrying that familiar scent of snow, dry, metallic, like the land itself is giving a warning. You likely wouldn't survive this, not unless you can find or build a place the blizzards cannot touch. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I share here. And if you feel like it, leave your location and the time of night in the comments. I'd like to know who's drifting into this story alongside me. Now lower the lights. Let the noise of the day fade and slow your breathing. You're standing on ground that, just months ago, waved with tall grass. Families came this way in creaking wagons, oxen straining, chasing the promise of land. But winter is no polite guest. It does not wait for readiness. By October, the winds strengthen, stripping trees bare and rattling the loose boards of unfinished cabins. And you, still holding the reins of imagination, step closer into the camp of a frontier family. The first well-known fact is blunt. Westward settlers in the 1800s often misjudged how severe the winters could be. Even experienced farmers from Europe or the eastern states were stunned by the force of prairie storms. With temperatures dropping below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, what looked like a gentle snowfall could, within hours, become a white wall that erased all landmarks. You hear the flap of a wagon tarp as you imagine what pioneers brought with them. Axes, saws, perhaps a plow far too hopeful for soil still frozen hard. Children held dolls stuffed with rags, while mothers carried iron pots and jars of lard. Then a curious detail slips in. Some families even hauled cherished pianos across hundreds of miles of wilderness. You picture the strange scene of Beethoven echoing inside a cabin while the wind howls at the door, as if culture itself might keep the storm at bay. Still, shelter cannot wait. Historians continue to debate whether the earliest settlers were reckless dreamers, blinded by land grants and opportunity, or whether they truly believed their rough shelters would endure the season. Either way, their urgency is clear. At sunrise, men with frost clinging to their beards drag logs through snow, chopping until their hands blister. Women gather whatever brush they can find, tying it into bundles for kindling. Children rush about with red cheeks and runny noses, doing small tasks to keep from standing still and freezing. Move a little closer in your thoughts. The earth smells raw where a spade has cut into it. A voice calls out, tired yet hopeful. Inside the half-built cabin, there is no warmth yet, only the echo of hammer on nail. You run your hand along the rough bark of a log wall. It's splintered, sticky with resin, and feels like thin protection. Your shoulders tighten at the thought of the first real blizzard slamming down. Pause and feel the quiet between gusts. It's heavy, pressing against your chest. Out beyond the light, wolves move silently, paws gliding over crusted snow. You don't see them, but the settlers do, or at least believe they do. Shadows flicker at the edges of lamplight, enough to quicken the pulse. And yet, there's an odd calm to this land. The sky stretches like a wool blanket, gray and endless. The imagined crunch of boots through drifts has a steady, almost sleepy rhythm. It's easy to picture lying down beneath that weighty sky and letting the storm pass. The settlers could not allow themselves that peace. They raced the clock, working from dawn until dark, building walls thick enough to trap the fire's heat and roofs steep enough to shed snow. Every pull of the saw felt like a prayer against the coming storm. And as you close your eyes for a moment, you can almost feel the burden of those prayers on your own shoulders, as if survival itself were a rhythm your body had to follow. By tomorrow, the walls might stand higher. The stove might finally send smoke through a rough chimney. But for now, you remain in this unfinished moment, caught between biting wind and the fragile promise of shelter still untested. You stir awake inside this drifting reverie. Snow crunches under boots, echoing softly as you move with a frontier family. The scent of pine sap clings to axe handles, and your breath clouds the air like a small ghost trying to escape. It's time to build more than hope. A cabin rises, not in a single afternoon, but strike by strike, as hands blister and shoulders burn. You watch a man swing his axe into a thick tree, bark splitting, wood chips scattering across frozen ground. Each blow is measured, almost rhythmic. Timber is the greatest treasure in this harsh season. Families spread out, marking trees that could become walls, beams, or roof planks. A commonly cited fact notes that a simple one-room log cabin could be raised by an experienced group in a few weeks, though on open prairies where trees were scarce, this was no easy task. Those who found groves near rivers counted themselves fortunate. Those who didn't had to haul wood across punishing distances. You step closer and hear the sharp crack as the trunk gives way, crashing into the snow with a hollow sound. Children clap as if watching a show. The father quickly notches the ends with his axe, shaping the logs so they'll lock together like pieces of a puzzle. A cabin wall is never just stacked. Each log must fit tight, with corners strong enough to resist the wind's force. You touch the fresh cut, and it feels almost warm, the pale inner wood contrasting with frozen bark. Some families work together in what was known as a raising. Neighbors trudged through drifts to help lift beams, each man gripping an end, each woman preparing food to keep morale intact. Another small detail emerges. A few families carved their initials, sometimes even hearts, into the logs before setting them in place. As if affection could live inside walls stained with sap. Picture lying on the floor at night, wind screaming outside, knowing a small carved heart rests just behind your head, a quiet symbol of stubborn hope. Still, historians debate whether settlers misjudged the labor timber building required. Some argue lighter, faster methods would have better suited the treeless plains. Others respond that the log cabin was more than shelter. It was a cultural statement carried west, proof of belonging and intent to stay. Perhaps both views hold truth. What you feel standing among these frozen figures is urgency mixed with ritual. Every notch cut into wood is a declaration, we will endure here. Step deeper into your imagined cabin. The floor is packed earth, uneven beneath your boots. The walls rise log by log, not neat like a townhouse, but slightly irregular, each beam marked by hand tools. There is no glass in the windows. The openings are small and rough, meant to be covered later with greased paper or hides. Roof beams, hoisted with strained voices and effort, creak as fresh snow begins to settle. Picture the scent first. Fresh cut wood mixed with sweat. The metallic smell of blood from a nicked finger. The air vibrates with noise, the steady beat of tools, children calling out, the low breathing of cattle tied close by. Somewhere, a dog barks into the wind. You can almost feel heat rising from bodies moving in shared effort, even as the outside air bites with cold. In one corner, a woman kneels beside a small fire, watching a pot of beans and salted pork. The smell is oddly sweet. It is a hard season. Her hands are cracked, yet she hums quietly, trying to soothe the children. Nearby, a baby wrapped in quilts sleeps, each small breath fogging the air. You crouch near the flames to steal some warmth, even as sparks sting your skin. Already, the family is planning how to carry this fire into the cabin once it is finished. Snow flurries slip through the gaps of half-built walls. You feel them hit your cheek and melt on your lashes. Someone shouts to work faster. The cabin needs 4 walls before nightfall, or the family will spend another freezing night in the wagon. You glance toward it. The canvas cover sags, clearly no match for what is coming. You understand why no one slows down. Another figure approaches, a neighbor bent against the wind. He carries a jug, sharp-smelling, likely whiskey, and offers it as encouragement. You imagine the taste, the burns sliding down your throat, a small reminder that little comforts helped people endure. The walls rise to shoulder height, then higher, until you have to tilt your head back. Logs are lifted and locked together, fitted carefully, like oversized building blocks, though nothing about this work feels light. When a beam slips and crashes into the snow, the sound lands like a warning. Time is running out, and energy fades with every shiver. You pause, sensing the storm closing in. The air grows heavier. Clouds thicken overhead. The prairie stretches flat beneath the sky, vast and unforgiving. Imagine lifting the final log, muscles burning, breath breaking into short gasps. At last, the cabin stands enclosed, rough but complete. The roof will come later. For now, a canvas is pulled across the beams. Still, tonight the family will sleep inside 4 wooden walls. Step across the threshold in your thoughts. The cabin smells of pine and mud, of human breath and quiet hope. Snow crunches underfoot, tracked in by boots. A lantern flickers on a rough shelf, throwing shadows that make the logs seem to move. Thin lines of light shine through the seams. Tomorrow they will be filled with moss, clay, or scraps of cloth. Tonight they remain open, and a draft slides across your ankles. Even so, there is relief. The fire, now moved into a simple stone hearth, crackles with resin. Sparks leap upward through the open chimney space, disappearing into the dark. Warmth spreads across your hands. A dog curls near the hearth, steam rising faintly from its wet fur. The family breathes out together, one shared sigh of survival. You lean against the wall, listening as the storm strengthens outside. The logs creak, but they hold. Snow whispers against the canvas roof. Far off, wolves move through the darkness, their howls carried lightly across the plains. Inside, there is a strange comfort in thin walls, in knowing danger is close but not yet inside. Close your eyes. Picture the cabin alone, a fragile wooden box set in a sea of snow. Lamplight glows through narrow cracks, a faint yellow pulse in the white expanse. The wind strikes hard, but for this night, you are safe. You step forward again, boots crunching on frozen ground. The timber cabin slips into memory. Now something else rises from the prairie. It looks less like a house and more like part of the land itself, a low mound blending into the earth. As you approach, you realize that many families dug straight into the soil to survive. The sod house, heavy, earthen, and plain, became shelter for countless frontier settlers. Imagine using the surface of the prairie as your walls. Settlers cut thick slabs of sod, each about the size of a loaf of bread, roots and grass still woven through. They stacked them like bricks, layer by layer, until walls rose waist-high, then higher, enclosing a single room. It was simple, but here is a key fact worth noting. By the 1870s, sod houses were the most common homes on the treeless plains of Nebraska and Kansas. They were fast to build, strong against wind, and unexpectedly warm once snow packed against their sides. Picture yourself touching one of these sod blocks. It feels damp, smells of grass and loam, like a meadow torn up and rebuilt indoors. Soil crumbles onto your palm, leaving it dark and stained. Families learned that in winter, earth walls held heat better than wood, acting like a heavy quilt around the home. The labor, however, was exhausting. Cutting sod meant hours of hard work, lifting each block with a spade and dragging it across the ground. The edges were uneven. Roots hung loose. Insects clung stubbornly. One odd detail often mentioned. Some settlers complained that snakes emerged from the sod walls in spring, drawn by warmth near the fire. Imagine lying half asleep under a patched quilt and seeing a snake's head appear from the wall, an unwanted housemate. Historians still debate whether sod houses truly protected families or only extended their hardship. Some see them as clever solutions, proof of human adaptability. Others describe them as little more than damp burrows, filled with pests and shaped by desperation. Both views may be true. You sense this conflict as you stand inside one now. A lamp flickers against brown walls that seem to shift as the soil settles. Step farther inside. The ceiling is low, supported by timbers hauled from far away or repurposed from wagon parts. Sometimes prairie grass was woven together to form the roof. The air smells musty, sharp with damp earth. When snow piles on top, you hear its muted weight pressing down, each soft thump felt deep in your chest. It is not quiet. It is nature making itself known. The floor is bare dirt, swept smooth but never clean. It feels cool beneath your feet, moisture rising through it, leaving dark patches. Buckets line the walls to catch water dripping from melting snow above. Children move about in worn socks, leaving muddy prints that never fully disappear. Yet even here, families tried to make these dugouts into homes. Quilts hung along the walls brought bits of color. Shelves made from spare boards held treasured flour tins and jars of preserves. Listen now to the dull crackle of a fire in a simple stove. The iron glows orange, warming one side of your body while the other remains cold. Smoke curls slowly, reluctant to escape, and the air feels heavy in your lungs. Imagine nights like this, wind howling outside, wolves moving unseen. Inside these earth walls, sound softens. It feels almost buried, hidden from the world. There is even a hint of calm, like a creature resting in its den. Families sleep close together on straw bedding and patched quilts, bodies pressed tight for warmth. You feel the straw scratch your cheek, the steady breath of someone beside you. Still, hardship never fully leaves. The damp air clings to clothes and blankets, turning them moldy if they are not carefully watched. Insects, spiders, and beetles crept in from the grass-covered earth. And when severe storms arrived, roofs sometimes collapsed under heavy snow, crushing families in seconds. You can picture the crash, the burst of dust, and the desperate rush to dig out. The prairie provides, but it also reclaims. Step outside again in your thoughts, squinting against the glare of the blizzard. From afar, sod houses disappear into the low prairie, appearing as small earthen mounds with thin trails of smoke rising. They blended so closely with the land that travelers often passed without noticing them. One account tells of a rider nearly driving his horse straight over a sod roof, unaware a family was seated below, eating supper. That image remains vivid, the thin margin between life and disaster, separated from hooves and weather by little more than packed soil and belief. Pause for a moment. Let the wind rush past your ears. Hear its low whistle sweeping across the open plains. You sense snow in the air again, dry and metallic, mixed with the smell of damp earth from the sod walls. There is something both grounding and confining about it. On this frontier, the land beneath your feet could also serve as your roof, your shelter, your final defense against the storm. Yet despite everything, families found joy here. They laughed, sang hymns, shared stories, and played fiddles when one survived the journey. A dog curled up in the corner. Children laughed beneath patched quilts. A woman stirred stew in an iron pot, steam clouding the earthen ceiling. You feel the warmth of that scene, life taking root in soil, fragile but persistent. It feels almost contradictory. Something so crude and temporary became the setting for memories, births, and even weddings. You imagine candles flickering against sod walls as vows were exchanged, snow falling quietly outside, the storm held back for a short while. As the thought settles, the walls blur, the sod fades into shadow, and the roar of the storm dulls. What remains is the sound of breathing, the heaviness of damp air, and the uneasy comfort of being hidden underground while the blizzard rages above. The storm strengthens, and you sense the prairie shifting into a harsher rhythm. The log cabins and sod dugouts you glimpsed before now fade behind thick snowfall. What comes into view next is even more vulnerable. Canvas stretched over poles, temporary tents that many families still depended on when the first true blizzard struck. You move closer, your boots sinking deeply. The canvas snaps in the wind like a startled bird's wings. Ropes are tied to stakes driven into frozen ground, but the wind tugs relentlessly, pulling the fabric tight until seams strain. Inside, the space is cramped, the walls so thin that every gust outside is clearly heard. A well-documented reality of frontier life was that many newcomers arrived too late in the year to build permanent homes. They relied on canvas tents, wagon covers, or rough lean-tos, expecting them to last until spring. The prairie showed little mercy. When temperatures dropped and snow fell in sheets, those thin layers offered almost no protection. You duck under the flap in your imagination and feel the cold immediately. The air inside is barely warmer than outside. Children huddle under blankets, their breath forming pale clouds that gather on the roof and drip back as icy moisture. Someone attempts to warm the space with a small fire, but sparks threaten the fabric. Smoke mixes with wet canvas, and you realize how quickly hope could disappear if flames took hold. Strangely, some families tried to insulate their tents by piling snow along the sides, hoping the drifts would act as walls. The irony is clear, using the storm itself as a tool for survival. Packed snow could hold in heat, but it also made escape difficult if winds tore the tent or fire broke out. desperation taught hard lessons, learned during long, sleepless nights. Historians still debate whether pioneers who relied on tents were careless or simply victims of poor timing. Some records describe families arriving in late autumn, with days too short to build cabins. Others suggest settlers were overly confident, assuming their Eastern camping experience would be enough. As usual, the truth rests between hope and misjudgment. Now picture the sound. Wind lashes the canvas until it cracks sharply. Poles creak and shift. Snow stacks against one side until collapse feels imminent. Each gust shakes the stakes, and you imagine the moment one might loosen. The whole shelter shivers, and for a brief instant, you fear it will give way over the trembling family inside. You sit among them, knees pressed to wet ground. The soil beneath is frozen, but water pools on the surface, soaking bedding. Quilts grow heavy with dampness, carrying the smell of mildew. The air fills with coughing and the cries of sleepless children. A kettle rattles on a rough iron stand, its steam rising weakly before vanishing in the cold. Still, moments of quiet resilience appear. Someone lifts a fiddle and draws out slow notes that float above the storm. The sound is thin but gentle, and for a short time, the tent becomes a small refuge of music. You lean back, eyes closed, letting the melody soften the wind's roar, if only briefly. One unusual account remains. Some families kept livestock just outside the tent, tying horses or cows close so their body heat might seep in. The smell was strong, but warmth mattered more. Imagine falling asleep to the sound of a horse breathing beyond the canvas, your survival linked directly to that rhythm. The tent sags as snow piles higher. Inside, voices fade. Everyone listens, to the wind, to the fabric, to the pressure of nature. Outside, the prairie is erased in white. Inside, the space feels tight, a cage of flapping cloth. You touch the canvas and feel it quiver, almost alive. Some experts see these shelters as symbols of courage, proof of settlers enduring the unbearable. Others see only desperation, poor choices framed as bravery. You breathe in the tension, sensing both resolve and regret in the damp air. When the storm peaks, the tent sways violently. Snow forces its way through seams, stinging faces before melting into icy trails. Children whimper, mothers soothe, fathers brace poles with their shoulders. You imagine yourself doing the same, pressing your back against a shaking beam, hoping it lasts until morning. The night drags on. Sleep comes in brief fragments, each broken by the snap of canvas overhead. Finally, a dull gray light filters through the fabric. The storm weakens, leaving drifts piled high around the camp. You crawl out into sharp air, blinking at a world transformed into rolling white dunes. The tent behind you looks worn and sagging, yet it still stands. You release a slow breath, sharing the exhaustion of the family who endured the night. The lesson is simple. Canvas was never meant to face a blizzard, but it carried them through. Sometimes, surviving a single night was enough to move forward. As you step away, snow crunching underfoot, the tent fades into falling flakes. The prairie stretches on, demanding more than fabric, demanding wood, earth, and determination. You move toward the next shelter, settlers shaped against the cold. The air cuts sharply as you approach rough log walls again. This time, you notice the fine gaps where icy wind slips through. Even solid log cabins could fail if the seams between timbers were left unsealed. You find yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with a frontier mother, her mud-streaked apron pulled tight as she bends with a bucket, a small child close at her side. Together, they press handfuls of material into the gaps, determined to drive out the drafts. One unavoidable feature of frontier building was chinking. The spaces between stacked logs were rarely tight enough to block air, so families filled them with whatever they could find. Clay, mud, straw, moss, even strips of worn cloth were pushed into the cracks, sometimes braced with sticks. Without this step, a cabin was little more than a sieve, letting cold pour in while precious warmth escaped. Imagine trying to keep a fire alive through the night as wind hissed through dozens of narrow slits around you. Chinking meant survival, nothing less. You crouch in the dim cabin, the dirt floor cool beneath your knees. Your fingers sink into a mix of mud and moss, sticky and cold. You spread it into the gap between two logs, watching the darkness vanish, replaced by a dull brown seal. The smell is earthy and sharp, like soaked ground after a storm. Children laugh as they smear mud on their noses, turning labor into a brief game. Accounts from outsiders note that some families, short on supplies, stuffed rags or even pages torn from hymnals and newspapers into the spaces. Imagine yesterday's headlines pasted against your wall, ink blurring when touched by frost. It is a strange intimacy, words meant for public eyes pressed into the private cracks of a home, a thin paper barrier against the roar of winter. Researchers still debate how effective these different chinking materials truly were. Clay hardened but split under repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Moss trapped moisture and sometimes decayed. Old cloth might last a week, then fall apart when gnawed by mice. Yet families defended their chosen methods fiercely in letters and diaries. Was it science, or simply the reassurance of believing you had done something, anything, to keep the cold away? You tilt your head and listen. The storm outside continues, but the whistling is softer now, muted by freshly packed seams. You run your hand along the wall and feel only a faint trace of wind. There is relief in that moment, as if the house itself exhales, content to hold its warmth a little longer. Still, the work never truly ended. Each morning, settlers inspected the walls, patching where mud had crumbled overnight or where melting snow had seeped in. You can almost see them circling the cabin with buckets of clay, boots crunching on frost, breath rising in white clouds. In this daily routine lay both irritation and comfort. Resealing the house again and again reminded them of fragility, but also of control. Inside, the light is dim yet golden. A lantern sways gently, shadows stretching like fingers across the patched walls. The chinked seams stand out, uneven and rough, but they also speak of care. Every filled gap marks a pair of hands, a small act of defiance against winter. You glance at the stove, hear the iron ping as it expands with heat, and notice the room feels warmer than expected. The small efforts are paying off. You lean closer to the wall, nose nearly brushing damp clay. The scent of earth is strong, mixed with smoke from the stove. In the faint glow, strands of straw poke out like whiskers, trembling when wind presses from outside. For a moment, you imagine the cabin as something alive, shivering, yet stubborn, held together by human resolve and handfuls of mud. A few families even experimented with plastering walls inside and out, using a lime and sand slurry when they could get it. This was rare on the frontier, but those who managed claimed their cabins stayed much warmer. You picture bright white plaster inside a one-room cabin, reflecting lamplight so strongly that nights felt shorter, brighter, almost refined. But the cost was too high for most, so the majority relied on mud that cracked and moss that molded. Some historians argue these rough homes, patched with earth and rags, reflected settler resilience. Others see them as evidence of neglect by distant governments that encouraged migration without providing real support. You let that debate settle as you study the sealed seams. Whichever view you choose, one fact is clear. Without these crude layers pressed between logs, many families would not have lived to see spring. Outside, the wind rises again, testing the defenses. You sit quietly, listening to the softened roar. Snow taps against the chinked walls, but the air inside stays steady, warmer than you expected. A child curls against your side, blanket tucked close, whispering that the storm sounds like wolves circling, like ghosts brushing past. You smooth their hair and whisper back that the walls will hold, and you almost believe it. Hours later, dawn slips in, pale and thin. You peer through a small opening and see drifts piled high against the logs, sealing them even more. Sunlight sparkles on the snow crust, though the air remains bitter. Behind you, the patched walls stand firm, mud drying in odd patterns, rags bulging slightly. Not beautiful, not flawless, but useful. The family stirs, stretching stiff limbs, ready to repeat the task again. You take one last look at the wall. Each uneven seam is a scar, a reminder of the nightly struggle between warmth and frost. In the end, survival is not about elegance. It is about hands pressed into cold mud, voices steady with resolve, and the belief that even the smallest effort can hold back an endless storm. The storm remains outside, but inside the cabin another force takes center stage: fire and iron. You step toward the stove, hear the low murmur of burning wood, and feel warmth creep into your fingers. This simple black box is no luxury. It is the heart of survival. Without it, walls packed with mud and straw would still leak cold. With it, families could pretend, if only briefly, that the blizzard might be mastered. One well-documented reality of frontier winters is that iron stoves transformed daily life. Before their wider use in the mid-1800s, open fireplaces were common, but they wasted fuel and sent heat up the chimney. The box stove, with its door, stovepipe, and flat top for cooking, allowed settlers to stretch every stick of wood, every lump of coal, every handful of dried buffalo chips. In diaries, pioneers marveled that a small load of kindling could warm an entire one-room home. You lean closer, palm hovering above the surface, and feel a steady wave of heat spreading outward. Yet that same lifeline carried risks. Chimneys, often pieced together from mud and stone, smoked poorly. Rooms filled with haze that burned eyes and throats, leaving walls blackened with soot. Imagine sleeping under a quilt, drifting off, then waking with lungs raw from breathing smoke all night. Some settlers joked grimly that smoke might kill them before the storm ever could. Researchers still debate how safe these stoves really were. Some see them as a triumph of adaptation, a technology that helped families conserve scarce resources. Others stress the dangers: chimney fires, children burned by glowing iron, silent poisoning when vents clogged. You shift your weight, hear the stove crack as resin pops in the wood, and consider both sides. Safety and survival rarely aligned here. Compromise was unavoidable. Step closer. The smell thickens, pine sap and crackling resin releasing a sharp, sweet scent that clings to your clothes. Smoke curls lazily from the pipe, leaving a faint metallic tang. You hear logs settle and collapse inward, orange embers glowing like tiny suns. A kettle trembles gently on the stove, steam slipping from its spout and carrying the smell of dried herbs soaking in hot water. Families often gathered around this small iron hearth, not just for warmth, but for company. You can picture them now, drawn in close. Children stretched out on worn rugs, parents pulling chairs nearer, a dog curled so close its fur nearly scorches, voices lowered to quiet murmurs, as if the stove itself commands respect. The storm may howl against the walls, yet here in the middle there is a pocket of light and heat. An interesting detail appears in settler journals. Some families dried their laundry by hanging it directly above the stove, filling the cabin with the scent of damp wool and soap. At night, as clothes steamed and hissed in the heat, people joked they were living inside a giant soup pot. Imagine lying beneath your blanket, hearing your shirt faintly sizzle overhead, comforted by the thought that you would have something warm to wear come morning. The stove also served as a kitchen. You can imagine bread baking on iron plates, beans bubbling slowly in a pot, bacon crackling as grease dripped and smoked. The smell was rich and comforting, though slightly acrid. Food absorbed the taste of smoke, and while settlers grew weary of it, you would gladly eat those smoky bites now, thankful for the warmth settling in your stomach. Yet danger was always present. Sparks jumped from the open door, sometimes setting rugs or straw bedding alight. Children carried scars from leaning too near, their skin blistered where hot iron met flesh. Letters describe mothers pulling infants back, warning again and again, but accidents still occurred. A small disaster could unfold in moments, leaving a family shaken for years afterward. Some scholars suggest that despite these risks, stoves provided a psychological anchor, proof that people could create a space of comfort even in an unforgiving land. Others emphasize how fragile that sense of safety was, noting that a single blocked chimney or falling ember could destroy everything. Standing in the center of the cabin, you feel both ideas at once. Soot in your lungs, warmth on your palms, survival balanced delicately on glowing coals. The sounds surround you. Wood snapping. The soft hiss of sap. A child humming under their breath. Outside, wind flings snow against the roof, but here the noise is muted. The stove has become its own climate, a small sun in a frozen world. You close your eyes and let the heat sink in until your shoulders loosen. Still, comfort does not erase fatigue. Someone must tend the fire, rising in the dark hours, fumbling with half-frozen logs to keep the embers alive. Picture yourself waking at midnight, stirring ashes with numb hands, your breath clouding the cold air that creeps back the moment the flames weaken. You feed the stove, hear it growl softly back to life, and know the relief will only last a while. Strangely, even in hardship, there were moments of near-comic absurdity. Some families cooked everything, bread, coffee, even soap, on the same stovetop. Scents blended together, so breakfast might carry a trace of lye, or stew a hint of laundry soap. You wrinkle your nose and smile faintly, imagining such odd meals shared around the table. As the night wears on, the stove glows red, casting long shadows across the log walls. Children sleep tangled in quilts, cheeks flushed from the heat. Adults sit quietly, staring into the small window of fire behind the iron grate, thoughts drifting as steadily as the flames. You sit with them in silence, absorbed by the movement of light and shadow. Morning arrives with frost clinging thickly to the windows, yet inside the cabin remains livable. You stretch stiff limbs, smell yesterday's smoke in your hair, and hear the soft crackle of a final ember sighing in the ashes. The stove has done its job. It has kept the night at bay. Now step back in your imagination. See the cabin as a whole, smoke rising gently into the pale sky, a thin column marking human persistence on an endless field of snow. For all its dangers, the iron stove stands as the line between life and death, between frozen silence and another sunrise. And you, along with the family huddled close, have endured to face the storm again. The stove still glows faintly behind you. But now your attention shifts upward, to the creaking structure overhead. A frontier roof was never simply a covering. It was a risk. Too light, and snow pressed it down until the cabin collapsed. Too heavy, and the beams split under their own weight. You stand inside as the storm rages, watching flakes slip through a gap and melt into small drops on the dirt floor. The roof is the cabin's most uncertain promise. One well-documented detail from frontier architecture shows that settlers used whatever materials they could find. Overlapping shingles split from logs, bark peeled from trees, prairie grasses tied into bundles, or thick layers of sod piled atop rafters. Each option came with trade-offs. Wooden shingles shed water well but required scarce timber. Grass thatch was lighter, yet attracted rodents that scratched all night above sleeping heads. Sod roofs insulated effectively, but sagged dangerously under heavy snow. You look upward and imagine all these risks at once. The roof groans as if aware of its own limits. There are accounts of children climbing onto these roofs to shovel off snow, their small figures nearly lost in the white expanse. Picture them slipping along the ridge with crude shovels, parents shouting from below, wind threatening to knock them down. It was frightening and awkward, yet necessary. Without it, the weight of a single storm could crush the home. Historians still debate which roofing method worked best. Some claim sod roofs provided superior insulation and held warmth through the night. Others argue that wooden shingles, though harder to acquire, proved more durable over time. What no one disputes is the constant tension these roofs caused. You feel it now, tight in your chest, the creak of beams overhead, the shifting sigh of snow, the sense that survival depends on nails and timbers that may fail. Move closer in your thoughts. You place a hand on a support post and feel it tremble slightly under the strain. Outside, snow falls heavier, a steady hush like grains pouring onto cloth. The roof darkens beneath the load, groaning, sometimes cracking loudly enough to wake everyone in the night. You smell damp bark and mold, the earthy scent of sod above. Each leak drops onto bedding, spreading into dark patches that steam faintly near the stove. The soundscape never stops. Drips tap into tin cups set on the floor. Wind whistles through gaps where shingles fail to meet. Mice scurry in the thatch, their claws clicking softly. Together, it forms a restless chorus, reminding you constantly that the storm rules the land, and your roof is only a borrowed shield. Another curious note appears in settler letters. Some families weighted their roofs with lines of stones or even old wagon wheels, hoping to keep shingles from tearing loose. Imagine looking up to see a wagon wheel outlined against the pale sky, no longer a symbol of travel, but ballast holding down the top of your world. Even so, collapse was common. Diaries describe sudden crashes, entire sections giving way under snow or ice, families rushing to drag out bedding before it was destroyed. You hear that imagined thunder again, the sudden split and crash, dust and snow exploding into the room. Hearts race, children sob, adults shout instructions while bracing beams with whatever is at hand. Chairs, barrels, even their own shoulders. The fear remains long after the roof is repaired. Every creak becomes a reminder of how narrow the margin of safety truly is. Some scholars read these fragile roofs as symbols of settler life, durable enough to last, but only just reliant on constant attention. Others see them as lessons in compromise, evidence of how people adapted to whatever materials the land provided. You stand between these interpretations, listening to the roof sigh, aware that both hold merit. Even in such uncertain shelter, people manage to create small comforts. Picture yourself lying beneath that sagging roof, wrapped in quilts, listening to the fire crackle. Rain or snow taps softly into a bucket nearby, and you drift to sleep with its steady rhythm, like a rustic lullaby. Over time, small hardships became familiar sounds, leaks, drips, rodents, until what was once alarming turned oddly calming. Now step outside in your thoughts. Look back at the cabin, its roof bowed under heavy white drifts, smoke curling from the chimney. It appears delicate, yes, but also defiant against a storm-blurred horizon. It stands as a stubborn dark mark that says, "Here we remain." You brush snow from your shoulders and imagine the weight pressing not only on the timbers, but on every heart inside. Still, the walls endure, the roof holds, and morning will arrive again. For now, you return indoors, lower yourself onto the dirt floor, and close your eyes to the slow rhythm of drips and groans. The roof shudders, but it does not give way. Not tonight. It creaks above you, yet stands firm. Your attention shifts to a rough rectangle cut into one wall. There is no glass here. Glass is far too costly and heavy to haul across hundreds of miles of prairie. Instead, light seeps through a thin, waxy film stretched taut across the opening. You lean closer, your nose nearly touching it, and notice how the outside world dissolves into shifting gray. One well-documented reality of frontier cabins is that many windows were nothing more than openings covered with greased paper or animal hide. Settlers, resourceful and desperate, coated sheets of paper with lard or grease until they turned translucent, allowing a dim glow to enter while blocking the worst drafts. You press your hand against the film and feel its sticky surface, faintly oily, as though it might crumble under your touch. Yet it works. Without it, the opening would simply invite the wind to roar inside. Interestingly, children sometimes drew small pictures on these paper panes before greasing them, so faint outlines of birds, flowers, or words would glow when sunlight passed through. Imagine sitting in a one-room cabin during a howling storm, your only view of the outside world a blurred sketch of a bird, wings forever spread in oily translucence. A fragile trace of beauty set into a wall of mud and timber. Scholars still debate how effective these coverings truly were. Some argue they provided surprising insulation, especially when paired with tightly closed shutters at night. Others emphasize their flaws. Paper grew brittle, grease attracted grime, and hides stiffened and cracked in the cold. Standing in the half-light now, you sense that tension, a barrier that is protective yet imperfect, admitting just enough light to remind you the world beyond still exists. Move closer. The paper carries a faint smell of smoke and animal fat, mixed with the constant damp scent of logs. You watch frost creep along its edges, delicate feathers of ice spreading in silence. The window feels alive, its surface shifting with every gust. When the wind presses hard, the sheet bows inward like a drum, trembling as if about to tear. You hold your breath, waiting, but it somehow holds. The view it offers is neither clear nor fully closed. Outside, shapes blur, the pale sweep of snowdrifts, dark smudges of trees bending in the gale, the faint shadow of a figure moving to gather wood. You cannot tell if it is a neighbor, a stranger, or a memory, only that life continues just beyond reach. It is both reassuring and isolating, like hearing voices through a wall. One curious anecdote appears in letters from the period. Settlers sometimes layered multiple sheets of paper for strength, overlapping pages from old hymnals, seed catalogs, or school primers. Imagine the strange mosaic that formed, scripture glowing beside seed prices, fragments of arithmetic tables shining faintly with the morning sun. A child learning numbers by candlelight could glance up and see them softly illuminated in the window itself. Inside, the family treats the window carefully. Children are warned not to lean against it, for fear it might tear. At night, shutters, rough boards hung on leather hinges, swing closed to shut out the cold. The cabin drops into darkness, lit only by the stove or a lantern. You feel the change, the quiet that follows, as if the house itself has closed its eyes to sleep. Some historians suggest these paper-covered windows held symbolic meaning, a thin link to the outside world, enough to ease complete isolation. Others argue they were poor substitutes, proof of how cut off these families truly were. Standing here, you recognize both views. The window admits light, but not clarity. It suggests openness while reminding you that you are sealed away from everything beyond. The soundscape shifts. Snow taps softly against the paper, gentler than its sharp knock on wood. When the wind surges, the pane hums faintly, a low vibration that settles into your bones. Children murmur in half-sleep as a mother seals a small crack with more grease, closing the gap before frost can creep in. You smell the fat as it warms under her fingers, strong, earthy, mixing with stove smoke. Still, moments of beauty exist. On rare bright mornings, the cabin glows as if lit from within. The greased paper catches the light and spreads it into a warm haze. Dust motes drift lazily in the beam, and for a few precious hours, the space feels almost warm, almost cheerful. You sit by the wall, close your eyes, and pretend the storm has passed, even though you know it has not. Strangely, when settlers later wrote about these paper windows, many did so with a sense of nostalgia. Glass eventually replaced them, but memories of blurred light and greasy texture lingered, perhaps because they represented raw ingenuity during desperate winters, or because hardship often becomes cherished story when recalled by those who endured it. You lean back now, away from the fragile pane. The cabin darkens as clouds swallow the sun. The storm's voice rises again, wind shrieking, snow scraping the walls. Yet the paper holds, trembling but intact, like the families within. As night settles, the shutters close. The last glow fades, and you sit in darkness, lit only by the soft sigh of the stove. Outside remains unknown, sealed away by paper, grease, and wood. Inside, the air is warmer, the family closer, and the storm, though relentless, cannot erase the small light that survives here. The greased paper panes disappear into shadow, and now you descend, careful step by careful step, into the earth itself. Some shelters were not built above ground at all, but carved directly into it. Imagine bending low, boots sliding on frozen dirt, as you enter a dugout, a home half buried beneath the prairie. The air changes at once, heavy, damp, and close. You inhale slowly, taste clay on your tongue, and hear your breath echo softly against the earthen walls. One widely recognized reality of frontier life was that when lumber was limited or time ran out, families carved into stream banks or hillsides to form quick shelters called dugouts, sometimes known as cellar houses. These homes could be hollowed out within days, requiring little beyond shovels, physical effort, and urgency. Comfort was not the goal, speed was. Facing relentless prairie winds, even a pit in the earth offered more protection than a wagon or canvas tent. Personal accounts describe the other occupants of these spaces. In springtime, snakes, frogs, and field mice slipped inside, drawn to the damp soil walls just as people were. One mother wrote that her children gave names to the frogs hopping near the hearth at night, treating them like unwanted yet accepted neighbors. Picture settling into bed while a frog croaks from a crack in the wall, its sound echoing strangely in the tight room. Historians still disagree on whether dugouts truly kept families safe or simply exchanged one risk for another. Some maintain they blocked wind and snow, their thick earth walls offering insulation. Others highlight the dangers of mold, flooding, and roofs collapsing after heavy rain. Standing here, with the scent of dirt clinging to your hair, you sense that uncertainty. The dugout serves as both shelter and snare. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you notice the low ceiling supported by rough beams taken from wagons or salvaged wood. Moisture gathers and falls in steady drops, tapping into buckets set carefully below. The floor yields softly underfoot, mud pulling at your boots. The air feels heavy and damp, even in winter, as if the house itself strains to stay intact. Listen closely. Outside wind is muted, reduced to a dull groan through layers of soil. Inside, other noises surface. Mice scurrying within the walls, beams creaking under pressure, the occasional thump as loose dirt falls. A child coughs, the sound magnified by the confined space. Smoke lingers from a stovepipe jutting awkwardly through the earthen roof, its draft weak, its fumes slow to clear. Still, families work to make these holes livable. Quilts covered the bare walls, adding small bursts of color against the mud. A narrow shelf held jars of dried apples, their sweetness cutting through the damp air. A dog rests near the entrance, fur caked with dirt, ears flicking at every drip and creak. Children play with sticks on the floor, their laughter echoing in a hollow, unfamiliar way. For a brief moment, life feels almost normal. One curious detail: many dugouts were so dark that families marked time by rooster calls instead of sunlight, since dawn never reached inside. Imagine waking not to light, but to muffled crowing, then lighting a lantern to push back the constant twilight of your underground home. You reach out and touch the wall. The soil feels cool and fragile, crumbling slightly and leaving grit on your fingers. When the stove heats the space, condensation forms and drips, landing on your wrist. It feels strangely alive, as if the earth breathes alongside you. The closeness is unsettling, intimate, and you wonder how settlers endured months of it without breaking. Scholars continue to argue whether dugouts showed creativity or defeat. Were they smart responses to a land without trees, or proof that settlers had gone too far into inhospitable ground? Letters show both pride and embarrassment. Some families praised their snug shelters, others apologized for them, calling them temporary burrows until proper houses could rise. You stand in that same tension, unsure whether admiration or sympathy fits best. Night comes, though it is barely noticeable. Candles sputter in the damp air, their flames hissing as wax meets stray droplets. The atmosphere grows heavier, pressing on your chest. Families sleep close together, breaths mixing in the narrow room. You pull a quilt around yourself, smelling earth in the fabric, listening to water drip steadily into a bucket. Time measured by leaks. Then the storm arrives. Snow piles up outside, almost unheard. What you notice instead is the shifting groan of soil overhead, the soft sprinkle of dirt on your blanket. Children whimper. Parents murmur calm words. You press your hand to the wall and feel it shudder, as if the earth itself exhales. Each second drags until the pressure eases. The dugout holds. Relief flows through you, though you know it may only last the night. At dawn, you crawl back into the pale world above. The entrance is partly buried by drifted snow, and you push hard to break free. Cold air rushes in, sharp after the damp closeness below. Turning back, you see only a dark opening in the hillside, a faint thread of smoke rising. To a passerby, it might look like an animal den, but you know it was a home, a refuge, a fragile win against the storm. Left behind, the dugout stands as a symbol of human determination and human fragility. Its smell clings to your clothes, its closeness to your lungs, as you move forward again, tired but thankful. You step out of the damp dugout in your thoughts, brushing soil from your sleeves, when another sound draws you on, lowing, stamping, the shiver of hooves on packed snow. The storm thickens, yet a weak lantern glow flickers from a larger structure nearby. You push open a heavy door, hinges groaning, and enter the barn. Warmth meets you at once, not from fire, but from breath, the steaming exhalations of animals huddled together. A common frontier practice was using barns or stables as shelter when blizzards became deadly. If a cabin was unfinished, damaged, or too cold, families brought bedding into the barn and lived beside their livestock. Horses, cows, pigs, and chickens all gave off heat, turning the space into a crude but life-saving haven. You inhale air thick with hay, manure, and the sharp sweetness of animal sweat, and realize this smell meant survival. Diaries note that children often treated animals as roommates during these nights. Cows received nicknames. Hens were coaxed to roost near beds. Horses stood like quiet guardians, their large bodies radiating warmth. Picture lying under a quilt with your ear against a cow's side, listening to its steady digestion like a lullaby while the storm batters the roof. It feels absurd, yet oddly gentle. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. Some say it happened only in dire emergencies, others believe it occurred more often than people later admitted, driven by necessity rather than choice. Pride and practicality clashed in these memories. Was sleeping among animals a sign of failure, or a clever sharing of resources? Sitting now on a rough beam, the smell clinging to you, you feel both arguments pressing in. Look around. The barn is dim, lit by a single lantern hanging from a nail. Its light sways, stretching shadows across the animal's flanks. Steam rises with every breath. The air is damp but warm. Chickens rustle in their straw, softly plucking even in darkness. A horse stamps, the sound echoing like a drumbeat. You hold out your hands and feel the moist heat rising, different from a stove's dry warmth, but steady and dependable. The soundscape is full and alive, the rhythmic chewing of cattle, the flutter of wings as a hen shifts, the soft whine of a dog circling nearby. Together, these sounds drown out the storm, replacing fear with a rough, living chorus. You nearly forget the blizzard for a moment, soothed by the steady rhythm of animals breathing together. An unusual note appears in settler letters. Families sometimes milked cows at night during storms purely for the comfort of the routine, not only for food. Warm milk straight from the udder was a rare treat, filling tin cups with steaming nourishment when nearly everything else was frozen. Imagine holding such a cup now, the scent lightly sweet, the liquid warming your hands, while the blizzard screams unheard beyond the barn walls. Yet discomfort never fully faded. Floors were spread with straw, but manure accumulated quickly, the odor becoming overpowering. Families covered their noses with cloth, yet still woke coughing. Dust and feathers hung in the air. Bedding grew filthy within hours, and danger was constant. If illness spread among animals, people living so close risked infection as well. You shift uneasily, feeling the weight of that risk, yet understanding why families made this choice. Some researchers see these shared barns as moments where boundaries blurred, human and animal survival tightly linked in ways rarely recognized today. Others dismiss them as brief acts of desperation, not worth idealizing. Still, sitting here on the straw, leaning against a cow's side, you sense a strange closeness. Survival is not solitary. It is shared breath, shared warmth, shared life. You begin to notice details. A child runs a hand along a horse's mane, murmuring secrets into its ear. A mother collects eggs by lantern light, the shells still warm. A father sharpens a knife, preparing feed, his movements slow but steady. The dog curls near the family's feet, ears flicking, half asleep yet watchful. Each action is small and ordinary, yet together they form a fragile calm. One curious story lingers from a pioneer's memoir. He wrote that his family once depended on the heat of pigs to keep newborn twins alive through a harsh January night. The pigs lay in straw, snorting softly, while the infants slept nearby, their blankets warmed by animal breath. Absurd, perhaps, but in that moment also brilliant. You feel the odd tenderness of such a scene, equal parts humorous and sacred. Outside, the storm grows fiercer. You hear the barn roof strain, snow sliding from its sloped sides, wind rattling loose boards. Animals startle and shift, but the walls hold. The family draws closer, bedding piled thick, voices lowered in prayer. You sense the tension, the knowledge that this roof is only wood and nails. Yet with every horse's snort and every hen's cluck, the barn feels alive, protective. Morning arrives slowly as the storm weakens. You push open the heavy door and face a blinding white world, remade overnight. Inside, the barn releases a mix of hay, dung, warmth, and relief. The family blinks in the pale light, stiff and aching, but alive. The animals stir restlessly, eager to step outside, though snow still keeps them confined. You glance back once more. The barn is not graceful or clean, but it was refuge. Humans and animals endured together. Warmth was exchanged without question. Survival was shared without rank. On the prairie, the line between human and animal softened, and perhaps that is what kept so many alive. Step outside in your mind now. Snow crunches beneath your boots. Behind you, smoke rises from a cabin, steam lifts from a barn roof, and the storm pulls back toward the horizon. For a brief moment, there is calm, as if the world itself exhales in relief. But you know another storm waits, and when it comes, you will need every wall, every roof, every heartbeat, animal and human alike, to endure it. Walk with me into the silence beyond the barn. The storm has passed for now, yet the air feels sharper, as if the land itself draws breath before another strike. You turn toward the small cabin, surprised to see snow piled nearly to the windowsills. At first, it appears buried, swallowed whole. Then you recognize something unexpected. The family inside welcomes it. One well-known truth of prairie life was that snow, enemy, destroyer, killer, could also become an unlikely ally. Families learned that when snow drifted high against cabin walls, it acted as insulation. Packed drifts trapped warmth inside and sealed cracks better than any chinking. So while snow meant hunger for animals and danger for travelers, it also meant, paradoxically, a warmer night. You step closer, your gloved hand brushing the drift. The snow feels dense, wind-packed until nearly solid. It crunches beneath your palm but does not give way. The white mass presses against the logs like a second skin, cold to the touch yet strangely protective. Some children even turn these drifts into play, digging tunnels and carving small caves, naming them snow dens. Parents scolded them, fearing collapse, but the thrill of slipping into a frozen alcove was hard to resist. Imagine crawling through a snow tunnel, walls glowing faint blue, the air muted as if the outside world were paused. A crystalline playroom shaped by the same storm that could end your life. Historians still argue whether relying on snowbanks for insulation was clever adaptation or simple necessity. Some say it saved countless families, warming cabins without extra fuel. Others insist the danger of collapse or suffocation outweighed any benefit. You feel that tension now, standing beside the drift, comfort pressed tightly against risk, the frontier in miniature. Inside the cabin, the change is immediate. The room is quieter, muffled as if wrapped in cloth. The storm still rages outside, but its roar is dulled, its edge softened. You sit near the stove and notice how much warmer your knees feel, how the draft around your ankles has vanished. Snow seals the house so well that even the smell of smoke lingers, heavy in the air. The family coughs a bit more, but they shiver less. Listen closely. The snow settles with a faint groan, a low shifting sigh. Sometimes ice cracks deep within the drift, a muted pop like distant thunder. The children freeze at the sound, eyes wide, waiting to see if the wall will hold. When nothing happens, laughter returns, hesitant but real. You join in, relieved by the fragile safety the snow seems to provide. A striking account comes from a diary in Dakota Territory. One settler wrote that her cabin stayed so warm during storms that she cooked without a coat, thanks to snow piled almost to the roof. But when thaw came suddenly, water streamed through the walls, soaking bedding and food supplies. Warmth one week, disaster the next. You picture it clearly, dripping ceilings, soaked floors, children hauling buckets as if on a sinking ship. Still, in the heart of winter, most families accepted the trade. They packed snow tighter themselves, forcing it into gaps, piling it higher against doors, sealing windows completely. Imagine lying down at night, knowing you were buried alive by choice. Your home, a shell of snow, but warmer than it would have been without it. A strange comfort, unsettling in its own way. The sensory weight settles on you. The air smells faintly metallic, like frozen iron, mixed with smoke and grease. Your breath fogs, curling against snow-sealed walls and leaving tiny crystals on the logs. The quiet deepens until only the crack of wood in the stove and the soft shift of quilts remain. You close your eyes and notice how much calmer your body feels without the constant scream of wind. Experts disagree on what this silence meant. Some say it offered mental relief, a pause from the relentless howl of prairie storms. Others warn it was isolating, tempting settlers to forget the dangers outside. You decide. Both can be true. Silence can comfort, but it can also mislead. Hours pass. The storm eases further, but the snow stays packed thick against the cabin. The family gathers the courage to pry open the door. It groans in protest, frozen in place, until they shove it outward with shoulders and boots. A solid wall of white stands before them, taller than a man. They begin to dig, breath turning to vapor, arms burning, until a narrow corridor finally opens. In your mind, you work alongside them, lifting shovels, feeling the sting of snow through gloves, every scoop a reminder that survival is constant effort. Later, at dusk, you step outside and glance back. The cabin appears nearly swallowed, a low shape surrounded by endless drifts, smoke rising weakly into the air. It resembles a snow fort more than a home, like a child's design enlarged to human scale. Yet inside, warmth remains, a quiet success shaped from an enemy turned into protection. As strange as it seems, you feel thankful for the snow. Its weight is heavy and its danger real, but tonight it wraps the cabin like insulation. Tonight it separates harsh shivering from tolerable rest. As you return to the hearth and pull a quilt over your shoulders, the contradiction settles in. Snow, known for killing travelers, burying animals, and driving blizzards, becomes the very shield that keeps you alive when pressed against your walls. Frontier life teaches that nothing is straightforward. Even a storm can offer shelter, if you accept its cost. The walls lie deep beneath snow, dulling the sound of the wind. But when night falls, shadows return inside the cabin. Light becomes as valuable as heat. You look toward the stove and see only a weak glow from fading coals. Without light to resist the darkness, the hours feel endless, as heavy as the cold itself. This is when families relied on candles, lanterns, or anything that could make the dark less oppressive. One consistent detail of frontier life is that lighting was limited and unpleasant. Tallow candles, thick, pale rods made from animal fat, were most common. They crackled, hissed, and leaked wax, releasing a greasy odor that clung to walls and hair. Kerosene lanterns burned stronger, but the oil was costly and difficult to transport in large amounts. Often, settlers relied on makeshift lamps, a rag soaked in fat, set in a shallow dish, its flame trembling like a small presence in the dark. You can almost see it now, a soft, uneven glow reaching just far enough to reveal faces, patched quilts, and watchful eyes turned toward the storm outside. Settlers even reused food containers for light. Tin cups filled with grease, or a hollowed onion holding oil, served as crude lamps. Picture crouching near a glowing onion shell, its sharp scent mixing with smoke, light bending strangely across its curved surface. It sounds foolish, but survival often depended on such small inventions. Scholars still debate how much these dim lights affected morale. Some believe poor lighting increased isolation and despair, what we now call cabin fever. Others argue the weak glow created closeness, forcing families to sit together, faces warmed by a single flame. You sense both as you sit in the corner now, partly comforted, partly unsettled by the smoky light. Listen carefully. The candle sputters as a draft slips through the chinking. Wax slides slowly down its side, pooling on the rough wooden table. Lantern glass clouds with soot. Shadows stretch and sway. Outside, the storm rattles the walls. Inside this dim shelter, the struggle is against darkness itself. The air is heavy with smells: tallow, smoke, pine resin from the fire, and the faint sourness of unwashed wool. You breathe it in, thick but oddly grounding. An old account appears in pioneer letters. A child tried to read by candlelight so weak that he memorized lessons by watching shadows on the wall instead of the page. His mother later joked that he learned more from candle smoke than from books. You imagine the child now, head lowered, lips moving, light barely touching the worn primer in his hands. The image is gentle yet stark, showing how learning itself shrank when darkness closed in. Lighting also carried ritual meaning. Families lit candles before prayers, placing them carefully on rough-hewn shelves. The glow cast shadows of clasped hands, voices blending together. For a moment, the storm was quieted by faith, held within a flickering flame. You sit among them, eyes closed, following the rhythm of whispered words, candlelight soft behind your eyelids. Still, danger was always present. Flames tipped easily, catching quilts or curtains. Children carried scars from dripping wax, small burns marked into skin. Lanterns shattered, spilling oil across wooden floors that could ignite instantly. You picture the sudden terror of fire racing across straw bedding, the frantic effort to smother it before the cabin became an inferno. Fire offered life, yet stayed one mistake away from ruin. Some historians describe these fragile lights as symbols of endurance, small, unsteady, yet persistent against overwhelming darkness. Others see them as signs of hardship, proof of how little settlers possessed. You stand between these views, holding a candle, watching how the flame bends in the draft. It looks both weak and determined at once. The lantern hums softly, a faint hiss as kerosene burns. Wax continues to drip. Children whisper stories, faces half-lit, eyes bright with imagination. The room feels suspended, time slowed by shadows. You notice how silence grows heavier without steady light. In the flicker, you see your own breath, pale threads rising and fading away. Some families even used soot on purpose, darkening window coverings to keep light from leaking outside. They feared the glow might draw strangers, or wolves, whose eyes sometimes reflected eerily beyond the cabin. Imagine hiding your only comfort so it would not expose you, choosing deeper darkness for safety. Midnight arrives slowly. The candle grows shorter. The flame lowers and gutters. Wax pulls inward. Smoke thickens, stinging the throat. Someone yawns, tightens a quilt, and leans closer to the stove. You watch the final inch of wick curl and disappear, plunging half the room into deeper shadow. The lantern hisses faintly, oil nearly gone. Your eyes ache from straining in the dimness. Dawn feels impossibly distant. Yet there is softness in the glow. Families lean together, telling stories, singing quietly. A lullaby rises now, carried by a mother's tired voice, blending with the lantern's hum. You rest your head against the wall, soot brushing your hair, eyelids growing heavy with the rhythm. For a moment, the flame feels less like a struggle and more like a heartbeat, small, steady, and reassuring that the night will end. When morning finally comes, the storm has eased. Shutters creak open, letting pale daylight spill inside. Candles are reduced to stubs, lantern glass dark with soot. Still, the family is awake and alive, warmed not only by fire, but by the quiet courage of light itself. Step outside with them in your imagination. Snow lies deep, but the sky is clearing, stretched pale blue above. You look back at the cabin window, soot trails marking the paper panes, and understand that every flicker mattered against the vast darkness of a prairie winter. Even a greasy candle was a triumph. The lantern hisses softly behind you, its glow fading into soot and silence. Now, as you settle under your quilt, you feel the heavier truth of frontier survival. Even with patched walls and a burning stove, warmth did not come without layers of bedding. You pull the quilt tighter, rough and heavy, carrying the scent of smoke and wool, and realize this too was a defense against the storm. One well-documented fact of pioneer life is that quilts were not comforts. They were necessities. Women sewed them endlessly from scraps of old shirts, worn trousers, flour sacks, and any fabric they could recover. A completed quilt was never just decoration. It served as insulation, stacked 3 or 4 layers deep on beds until the weight pressed sleepers down. In your mind, you slide beneath such a pile, feeling the pressure of patched squares, each one a remnant of a different garment, stitched together into a pattern born of need. These quilts, strangely, carried stories. Some held pieces of wedding dresses, strips of military uniforms, or fragments of baby clothes. Picture running your fingers across a patch and realizing it once came from your father's coat or your mother's apron. In the depths of winter, when wind shook the walls and wolves howled beyond the dark, The quilt wrapped you not only in warmth, but in memory, a patchwork family record heavy enough to keep death at bay. Historians still disagree on how effective such bedding truly was in extreme cold. Some diaries describe nights when breath froze into frost above sleepers despite layers of blankets. Others recount families enduring -30-degree nights with nothing but stacked quilts and shared body heat. The truth likely sits between these accounts. Quilts could not conquer the storm outright, but they dulled its edge enough for children to sleep. Picture the setting. A straw mattress rests on a packed dirt floor, flattened and prickly. The quilt falls heavily over it, patched so often that original seams blur into later repairs. Children wriggle underneath, their bare feet icy until shared warmth slowly spreads. You slide in among them, shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with the smell of wool and unwashed bodies. Gradually, heat gathers, not from the stove across the room, but from this mass of cloth and flesh, this stubborn shelter. Listen closely. Outside, the storm roars, snow scraping the roof. Inside, there is only the soft shift of quilts, the half-sleep whispers of children, and the faint crackle of fire on the far side of the room. Quilts quiet the world. You close your eyes, feel their rough weight on your chest, and for a moment, the blizzard feels unreal. A curious detail appears in settler journals. Some families filled quilts with unconventional materials, grass, feathers from hunted birds, even shredded paper, anything that might hold warmth. One account mentions a quilt lined with rabbit pelts, the fur sewn inward. Imagine burrowing beneath that softness while frost crept along the rafters above. It was improvisation pushed close to eccentricity, but survival was rarely neat. Some scholars suggest quilting itself became a communal lifeline. Women gathered for quilting bees, stitching by lamplight while songs and gossip filled the room. These meetings produced warmth in more than one sense, forging connections among isolated families. Others argue the practice mattered as much for mental endurance as for comfort, giving restless hands purpose during long indoor hours. Both ideas linger as you trace the imagined seams of a quilt, each stitch a quiet refusal to give in. The sensory experience is clear. Quilts smell faintly of smoke, stove grease, and sometimes mildew. When dampness crept in, they scratched, especially those made from coarse flour sacks. Yet beneath them, the warmth was undeniable, building slowly until cheeks flushed and breath turned heavy. Your legs grew still under the layers. Turning was difficult. You surrendered to the quilt's weight, a forced stillness that strangely brought calm. Another overlooked detail emerges. Some families hung quilts along the walls, not only on beds, to block drafts. Picture sitting at a table while patchwork curtains flutter slightly. Each bright square stands as a barrier against the cold. The cabin becomes less a house than a padded enclosure, walls muted with fabric scraps shaped into desperate craftsmanship. You look around and see colors, reds faded to pink, blues worn to gray, patterns mismatched yet quietly striking against rough logs. The debate continues. Were these patchwork creations expressions of identity and creativity, or simply functional rags sewn together without emotion? The answer likely varied by family. Some clearly invested care in patterns, passing quilts down through generations. Others patched quickly, with little concern for appearance, focused only on warmth. In either case, the outcome was the same: survival. Night deepens. The family draws closer beneath the mound of bedding. A father snores softly. A child shifts between siblings. A mother hums under her breath, her voice traveling through layers of cloth. You drift with them, eyes heavy, body pressed down by weight. Outside, the storm screams, but it feels distant now, softened by walls, snowbanks, and this quilted barrier. Sleep comes easier under such heaviness. Settlers wrote of deep rest even as temperatures fell to extremes, as long as quilts were thick enough. You too give in to the pressure, to the sense that nothing can reach you. The quilt blocks not just cold but thought. By morning, frost rims your hair, yet your body remains warm beneath the covers. The stove is cold, the fire long dead, but the family still stirs alive. Quilts, damp at the edges, have carried you through another night. You rise slowly, lifting the layers, feeling cold rush in the instant they fall away. Breath clouds the air, toes curl on frozen ground, but the memory of warmth lingers like a held embrace. You glance back at the bed, at the patchwork heap, and realize that frontier survival was as much stitched as it was built. The quilts still rest heavy on your shoulders. But as your thoughts move on, your eye settles on another frontier necessity just as vital: the door. Ordinary today, but in a world where a blizzard could strip skin raw, the cabin door was no minor feature. It marked the thin boundary between storm and hearth, disorder and shelter. One well-documented fact of pioneer homes is that doors were rarely factory-made. Far from towns or carpenters, families built them by hand, often from rough planks split with axes. Nails were valuable, sometimes hauled hundreds of miles. Settlers instead fastened boards with wooden pegs, rawhide ties, or leather hinges cut from ox harness. You imagine pushing against such a door now, its surface rough, splintered, carrying the smell of sap and smoke. It does not swing smoothly. It groans, stubborn and heavy, but it keeps the storm out. In some cases, families used animal hides instead of wood, hanging buffalo or deer skins over doorways when timber was scarce. At night, the hides froze stiff, rattling when wind pressed against them. By day, they thawed slightly in warmth, dripping as they softened. Picture brushing past such a frozen hide, your shoulder touching rigid fur, the divide between wilderness and safety reduced to a single skin. Historians still argue over how secure these doors really were. Some describe them as solid barriers, proof of ingenuity with limited tools. Others point out how poorly they sealed, allowing snow and drafts to creep in. You sense that mixed truth now, the faint hiss of cold slipping through cracks even as the latch bar holds firm. The door is not absolute, but it is enough to declare, here the storm stops. A child slides the wooden latch into place. The soft clunk brings unexpected comfort. You lift the latch in your thoughts, feel its weight, rough, uneven, yet reliable in your hand. There is satisfaction in its simplicity. No locks, no keys, no polished metal. Just wood holding wood. Survival depended on what could be shaped with a knife. Outside, the storm continues to batter the cabin, the sound shifting with each gust of wind. Inside, the door holds. Snow scrapes against the walls, faintly drumming on the door. Inside, the latch rattles. Leather hinges creak, yet the door holds firm. It is not silence, it is negotiation. The storm presses. The door resists. You lean against it, shoulder to plank, feeling it tremble without giving way. Settler accounts mention a curious detail. Doors were often so low that adults had to stoop to enter. Built small to conserve heat, they forced even the proudest pioneer to bow when crossing the threshold. Imagine visitors arriving during a blizzard, bending low, stamping snow from their boots, ducking into warmth. Humility was built into the frame. Then there were the latches. Some were simple sticks propped against the door. Others were clever sliding bars, carved with whittled grooves. Children delighted in manipulating them, pretending they controlled grand gates. You hear the clatter now, the satisfying click of wood against wood. For a family trapped in winter, even a latch offered small entertainment, a miniature symbol of safety. Researchers interpret these crude doors in two ways. Some see them as symbols of frontier resilience, fragile but functional thresholds marking humanity's claim against the wilderness. Others emphasize vulnerability: wolves, thieves, or a strong gust could break through if determined. Running your hand along the plank, both interpretations feel valid. The door is not a fortress, but it is a declaration. Inside, by candlelight, the door almost feels sacred. Families hung herbs or charms nearby, sometimes a horseshoe on the frame, sometimes sprigs of evergreen. These small rituals whispered hope, warding off more than cold, evil, illness, loneliness. You lean closer and smell dried sage above the lintel, its earthy fragrance mingling with smoke. The door is both barrier and talisman. One diary recounts a strange event. A settler's door froze solid against the frame, trapping the family until morning. They laughed later, but in the moment, they feared suffocation. Windows sealed with snow, their only exit blocked. You imagine pressing hard, shoulder straining, hearing children whimper as fists hammer the immovable wood. What begins as protection becomes a prison. Listen again. The latch clunks, hinges creak, and outside the storm roars. Each shake of the door reveals its stubborn determination. Picture the father bracing against it, family huddled in quilts, his body itself reinforcing the barrier. Pine resin and cold air seep through, reminders of the fragile line between safety and exposure. Settlers sometimes carved initials or patterns into doors, a claim, a declaration to a land that resisted them. Step out at dawn after a storm, frost crusting the hinges, and see the rough mark of your name, a bold message to the wilderness. The cabin survived another night, and the crude, splintered door deserves credit. You step back inside, closing it firmly, the latch falling into place with that soft, reassuring clunk. Behind it lies warmth, laughter, and the stubborn will to endure. Beyond it, the endless storm. The door becomes more than wood, it is hope nailed together, standing against the prairie's howl. You draw a deep breath of smoky, warm air. For a moment, the cabin feels like its own world, sealed from outside dangers. Then comes a long, wild howl carried by the wind, stretching across the frozen prairie. It rises, falls, joined by others, until the horizon sings with hungry voices. Your heart slows as you realize the walls separating you from those sounds are little more than logs and clay. Frontier winters always included wolves. Packs roamed the plains, their lean shapes cutting across snow, eyes glowing faintly in lantern light. Settlers often lay awake, aware of wolves drawn to smoke, food, or livestock. Tilt your head, and you hear their chorus, a haunting music layered beneath the storm. Journals describe wolves scratching doors or circling barns, paws thudding softly in snow. Children sometimes mistook these sounds for late neighbors. Imagine tugging the latch, only to meet yellow eyes gleaming in the dark. The thought chills more than wind ever could. Experts debate the real threat of wolves. Some argue settlers exaggerated danger, projecting fear onto mostly scavenging animals. Others point to livestock attacks, dogs dragged from yards, and rare human encounters. You sit with that uncertainty, hearing scratches at the edge of imagination, predator or paranoia? Inside, the family reacts subtly. The dog lifts its head, ears twitching, then curls tighter. The father leans on his rifle by the bedroll. Children hush, eyes wide in candlelight. The mother pulls quilts closer, as if fabric could muffle the sound. Laughter dies. Silence thickens. Every heart listens to the wilderness pressing near. Fear blends with the ordinary smell of smoke and wool. Your pulse quickens, breath shallow. Outside, poor steps crunch in snow, faint snarls carried by wind. Wolves do not respect walls. They test and pace, reminding settlers the frontier was never fully theirs. One anecdote survives. Families tossed scraps outside during storms, hoping to distract wolves. Picture a mother flinging bones into snow, children peeking through cracks, dark shapes darting among pale drifts. Dangerous generosity, a brief taste of safety in exchange for a night of peace. The soundscape unnerves. Wind shrieks across the chimney, logs creak. Wolves' mournful howls swell and fade. Close your eyes. The vibration settles in your chest, primal, ancient. The dog growls low and steady, warning wolves and humans alike. Historians argue these moments, families huddled, wolves circling unseen, symbolize the thin line of settler control. Civilization had not tamed the land, it was tolerated barely. Others suggest wolf fear was psychological, folklore echoing from Europe. Both interpretations linger as you sit against the log wall, ears attuned. The storm shifts. Snow eases. Moonlight slices pale silver through the papered window. Shadows move outside, swift and low. You imagine lean bodies slipping through drifts, eyes reflecting light. The family holds breath, motionless, suspended between two worlds. Inside, warmth and fragile calm. Outside, hunger and teeth. Even amid fear, or remains. Wolves singing across the prairie remind you that life persists, even in dead winter. Their voices weave with the storm, a reminder of wildness and survival. You feel it in your bones, the uncanny beauty of danger, the intimacy of being noticed by the untamed. One settler recorded an unusual story: wolves paced so close that their hot breath frosted the window covering. The family inside could swear they smelled the musk of the animals mixed with the smoke from their own fire. The thought alone makes you shiver. Scent and sound crossing the thin barrier. Predator and prey separated by little more than logs. Eventually, the howls fade. The storm carries them off, scattering voices across the white horizon. The family exhales together, tension easing, though sleep will not come easily tonight. You sit back, shoulders loosening, grateful for silence but haunted by echoes that still hum faintly in your ears. By morning, paw prints will circle the cabin, pressed deep into the snow like warnings. Children will step out to fetch wood, eyes darting, hearts racing, boots sinking into the tracks left by unseen watchers. Life will go on, chores will resume, but the memory remains, the night when the frontier walls felt thinner than paper, when the wilderness seemed to sing at the door. As you pull the quilt tighter, you realize survival here isn't just about warmth or food. It's about living with fear, acknowledging it, and learning to breathe anyway. On the frozen prairie, you are never truly alone, and that truth is both comfort and curse. The wolves' howls fade into the distance, yet the memory clings to the cabin walls. You sink back onto the straw mattress, listening to the logs settle, when another sound breaks the hush, a low murmur of voices. They don't come from your family alone, but from next door, or more precisely, from the other side of a wall shared by two households. Not all frontier cabins stood in isolation. Sometimes survival meant building close together, letting warmth and company cross walls. A common feature of prairie life was that families often built cabins side by side or back to back, sharing walls to save labor and wood. Two households could split the cost of boards or beams, and adjoining walls reduced heat loss. You can picture yourself standing between them now, one thin timber partition dividing neighbors whose lives are as intertwined as the logs they stacked. Some settlers even cut doorways between cabins so children could pass back and forth without stepping into the blizzard. Imagine tugging open a crude door in your own living room, greeted by another family huddled around their stove. Laughter of cousins mingles with your own, quilts swap across thresholds, soup passes without ceremony. A small, domestic village forms inside the snowbound world. Researchers debate how harmonious these arrangements truly were. Some describe them as lifelines against loneliness, voices and prayers joining across thin walls. Others note inevitable quarrels over firewood, noise, or borrowed tools, sharpened by confinement. You feel that tension now, sitting by the stove. Comfort in numbers, yet claustrophobia when privacy disappears. The sounds of closeness shift the atmosphere. Through the log wall, you hear a baby cry, muffled but insistent. A man coughs in the dark. A fiddle plays softly, the tune leaking through the seams. It's both reassuring and intrusive, a reminder that struggles are shared, yet not secret. Diaries reveal another detail. Sometimes families leaned their beds against the shared wall to speak to neighbors without leaving their quilts. Half asleep, they whispered through cracks in the logs, trading news or jokes in the pitch of winter night. Intimacy born of necessity, voices traveling through wood like echoes across time. Step into the neighbor's cabin in your mind. The air smells slightly different, more cabbage, less smoke, but the rhythm is the same. Stove glowing, quilts stacked, children yawning. Faces pale in the lantern flicker, greeting you with weary familiarity. You realize the rooms are almost identical, each family following the same fragile script of endurance. Some historians argue these clustered cabins planted the seeds of frontier communities, knitting settlers into webs of cooperation. Others caution that such closeness could strain tempers, proximity breeding resentment as much as kinship. Running your hand along the shared wall, you feel both interpretations at once, strength and friction, bound tightly together. Listen again. The wind shrieks outside, snow lashing the walls, but inside, two households' voices rise against it. Hymns swell faintly, overlapping, imperfect but earnest. Children chase each other across the threshold, mothers scolding. For a moment, the storm fades into background noise, subdued by the chorus of human presence. A curious anecdote appears in a settler's letter. During a brutal January, 3 families connected their cabins with snow tunnels, crawling through like foxes to share meals and keep watch. Spring melted the tunnels into slush, but the memory endured, a reminder that ingenuity often walks the line between absurdity and brilliance. You imagine crawling through the snow passage now, lantern in hand, laughter echoing, the storm muffled above. The sensory detail deepens. The shared wall is warm, heat from both stoves bleeding into it. Bread bakes next door, mingling with beans simmering on your side. Quilts hang across the partition, swaying slightly, as if stitching households closer. Every sense confirms you are not alone. Survival here is collective. Yet cracks appear. Quarrels flare over wood, tending the fire, or stove hogging. Children cry when too many bodies crowd one room. Privacy vanishes. The smallest argument travels through every ear. Muffled voices rise sharply, disputes over nothing and everything. Silence follows, tense until a fiddle tune resumes, soothing tempers. Scholars argue, without this enforced intimacy, settlers may have abandoned claims. Others say proximity drove many back. Life here was never solitary, even when families imagined themselves alone. Walls carried voices as much as they blocked the wind. Night grows heavier. The storm presses close, but 2 stoves burn instead of one. 2 circles of quilts glow in lamplight. Through cracks in the partition, faint golden lines trace seams, proof that warmth and light cross borders. You lie back, eyes on the roof beams, listening to neighbors' murmurs and occasional laughter. The storm rages, but behind this architecture of sharing, life continues stubbornly. Come spring, some families dismantled connecting walls to reclaim privacy. Others left them, finding comfort in proximity even when survival was less urgent. Both choices reflect human complexity. The need to be together, the need to be apart, balancing survival with self. For now, in the heart of winter, 2 households breathe as one. Cabins do not stand isolated against the storm, they lean into each other, imperfect and human, their warmth multiplied. Under your quilt, lulled by voices through the wall, you know that even here, where the horizon swallows all, sound and connection survive. Neighborly laughter fades to a murmur. You lean against the log wall, feeling its rough surface through the quilt. Even with 2 stoves burning and snow piled high outside, the wind still finds its way in. Tiny drafts creep along the floor, teasing ankles, whispering through invisible cracks. Chinking alone could never seal everything. Families soon turn to creative methods, layering new materials into walls and floors to keep the relentless cold at bay. A common technique among pioneers was using paper, cloth, or straw as insulation. Some pasted old newspapers directly onto log walls, overlapping sheets until the surface became a patchwork of print. Others shoved straw or dry grass between planks, filling every gap. Imagine running your fingers along such a wall. The paper crackles beneath your touch, its surface roughened by smoke. Headlines about distant wars or politics glow faintly in lamplight, strange companions during long, sleepless nights. Some households even covered entire ceilings with cloth, draping sheets like sails to trap rising heat. Picture lying on a straw mattress, gazing at fabric swaying gently in a draft, darkening with soot over time. For children, it created a secret sky, a canopy for whispered dreams as snow battered the roof above. Scholars debate the effectiveness of these improvisations. Some claim they reduced drafts and conserved warmth. Others argue the comfort was largely psychological, a sense of control in a world dominated by nature. Perhaps both are true. The sensory details are vivid. Paper smells faintly of grease, applied to repel moisture, mingled with wood smoke. Straw crackles under your palm, shedding dust that tickles the nose. Quiet rustles hint at mice moving through hidden grass, thriving where humans struggle. Every layer meant to protect people becomes a habitat for something else. An unusual anecdote appears in letters. One family lined walls with empty flour sacks sewn together like wallpaper. Printed logos and mill names gleamed dimly in lamplight, turning the cabin into an accidental shop. Imagine sipping weak coffee while Minneapolis Best is stamped across your wall, a reminder of scarcity transformed into resourcefulness. As night settles, the cabin's soundscape deepens. The stove cools with soft pings, wind rattles at corners. Paper shivers with each gust, fluttering like faint wings. Quilts draped as curtains brush the floor. Even in stillness, the cabin hums, patches and layers creaking, settling into place. Historians interpret these makeshift insulations differently, as evidence of human ingenuity, or as signs of desperate, fragile measures doomed to fail. You sense both possibilities, hand pressed to a rustling wall, pondering whether survival leans more on cleverness or stubborn denial. Look closely. The cabin glows with mismatched textures, a dark log wall patched with moss, another covered with yellowed newspapers, a ceiling sagging under cloth, quilts covering drafts. The effect is chaotic but undeniably human, a collage of lives stitched together against the cold. Frontier folklore sometimes notes another tactic, nailing raw animal hides inside walls. Frost-hardened skins smelled strong as they thawed near the stove. Children wrinkled their noses, adults tolerated it, but the hides blocked drafts. Imagine resting your head against such a wall, smelling musk and grease, grateful for even a thin layer of protection. Hours pass, the storm rages outside, but inside, beneath cloth-draped ceilings and walls layered with straw and paper, quilts fluttering, the cabin feels like a fragile cocoon, trembling yet intact. You breathe slowly, shoulders easing as drafts lessen. Even a small bit of warmth is enough. Children often learned letters from newspapers lining walls. In daylight, they traced words and read aloud headlines about distant events, education integrated into insulation. Picture them reciting the alphabet while pointing to articles on presidents or farming disputes, absorbing history while staying warm. As dawn breaks, the paper still clings to walls, straw rustles in gaps, frost sparkles along seams. The family awakens alive, voices rough but steady. Improvisations may not be perfect, but they work. Step outside in your mind. Snow drifts high, wind bites, yet smoke curls from the chimney. Inside, the cabin is a patchwork of survival, scraps stitched into walls and memory. Walls rustle as morning light filters through greased panes, the house never fully resting. While adults repair cracks and tend the stove, children are the restless energy. The storm confines everyone, yet chores continue. A boy pulls on a wool coat, cheeks flushed, ready for another round of work. Frontier life demanded children's labor. Even in blizzards, they hauled firewood, fetched water, and tended livestock. Without them, families couldn't survive. Picture a 10-year-old girl carrying a heavy log to the stove, frost sparkling on her braids. Oddly, many remembered these tasks with pride, feeling valued and trusted. Memoirs recount moments like bringing snow inside to melt for water, watching it steam, a small magic. Children crowd around kettles, snow transforming into liquid gold under the stove's heat. Historians debate the effects. Did such work foster resilience or steal childhood? Some argue it built early independence, others say it forced premature adulthood. In the cabin, both truths resonate: the thud of wood, the proud smile of a boy who kept his family warm. Their chores create a soundtrack of survival. Water buckets clank, saws rasp as kindling is trimmed, boots shuffle on packed dirt. Younger children mimic elders, straining to help. Even play becomes practice, stick battles mimic chopping wood, dolls tucked in cloth echo sibling care. A diary recalls a child sculpting indoor snowballs, sneaking them through the door to melt on the stove, laughing as his mother scolded. The cabin fills with hissing snow and steaming mittens, a quiet reminder of endurance and small joys. You smile faintly, noticing the small humor in their mischief, even during such a harsh season. Step deeper into the rhythm of their day. Morning begins with hauling firewood, coaxing embers back to life in the stove. Water must be fetched if liquid, if frozen, snow must be melted. By noon, children sweep floors, patch leaks with rags, and hold lanterns steady while their parents mend tools. Evening brings quieter duties, stirring pots, rocking babies, spreading quilts for sleep. Each task may seem minor, but together they weave the unseen net that keeps the storm at bay. The sensory world is vivid. You smell damp while drying near the stove, acrid and smoky. Rough splinters prick your palms as children carry logs inside. Water sloshes in tin buckets, ringing sharply when set down too hard. Every detail carries necessity, each chore is a thread holding life's fabric together. Some scholars argue that children's work blurred lines between necessity and education. By participating, they learned essential skills not from books, but through muscle and memory. Others suggest the burden was heavy, that the frontier demanded too much from young shoulders. You feel both as a girl scrapes frost from the window with her mitten, her breath fogging the glass. Is she learning resilience or losing something tender? Perhaps both. The storm rages again, snow slapping the cabin walls, yet chores continue inside. A boy crouches at the hearth, blowing coals to flare. His sister balances a kettle, careful not to spill. The youngest, barely toddling, drags a stick across the floor, pretending it's firewood. Their play, their work, their survival, everything blends in the dim light. An odd memory surfaces from a pioneer's letter, children turning daily chores into songs, chanting rhymes while fetching wood or melting snow. Their voices rose above the storm, bringing rhythm to drudgery. Even in hardship, music stitched itself into survival. Night falls, but children do not rest until their tasks are done. A boy latches the door against the wind, a girl folds quilts neatly, fingers cracked and raw. Candlelight glows on their faces, tired, yet satisfied. Pride hangs quietly in the air, almost tangible, as if the house itself recognizes their contribution. When they finally lie down under patchwork covers, the day's labor clings to them. Their hands smell of wood smoke, hair of damp wool, cheeks streaked with soot. Breathing slows, steady, as though the storm cannot reach them in dreams. Step back now. The cabin is quiet, yet not empty. It hums with the children's work. Every stick of wood, every bucket of water, every patched seam bears their mark. Outside, the storm continues its relentless argument with the prairie. Inside, the youngest settlers have proven themselves guardians of warmth. The children drift into uneasy sleep, but the storm does not relent. You glance at the water bucket near the stove, expecting steam. Instead, a pale sheet of ice glimmers on its surface. Hard, cold, unyielding. Even inside, winter has crept in. Frontier diaries record this hardship, buckets freezing overnight, basins rimmed with ice despite stoked fires, frost forming on quilts, breath crystallizing on rafters, icicles dangling from nails. Inside and outside blur. Some families joked that one could skate across the cabin if floors iced over. One boy remembered sliding in socks, laughing until his mother scolded him. Almost comic until you remember cold sickness could kill. Experts debate how settlers coped. Some say fires never sufficed. Others blame poor insulation rather than the weather. Standing here, you sense both, human ingenuity pressed to its limits, nature pressing beyond. Inside, frost webs across the greased paper window, delicate yet cruel. Quilts feel stiff, edges hardened with ice. The air burns dry against your throat, each exhale swirls white. Even the stove, faintly red, seems small against such vastness. Water cracks as ice expands in the bucket. Snow melts in the chimney with a hiss. A child coughs in sleep. Each sound testifies to cold breaching the walls. One settler recalled frozen bread on the table, thawed against the stove's iron, scorched crust scent filling the room. Imagine chewing it with numb teeth, grateful for every bite. Cold seeped into bodies, toes numb under quilts, fingers stiff, frostbite claiming exposed skin. Survival meant enduring even when walls failed. Some historians argue such conditions tested mental resilience more than physical. Endless work could be done, but frost in beds brought despair. Others suggest endurance became routine. Settlers accepted frozen buckets as casually as morning dew. You weigh both as your gaze returns to the ice rim. The fire must be fed again. The father rises, stiff, loading logs until sparks leap. Heat radiates, but corners remain cold. Frost clings to quilts, icicles hang unchanged. Warmth was survival, not comfort. Some placed hot stones under quilts or wrapped potatoes for children, only to find frost soon returned. Imagine clutching a fading hot potato like a talisman, breath fogging above it. You hear the family stirring. A child wakes, complaining of a frozen blanket. A mother strokes his hair, whispering promises of dawn. Each exhale a small defiance against the blizzard. Morning brings no relief, sunlight glints off the windows, but the bucket remains frozen. Children crunch frost underfoot, laughing at icy footprints on the dirt floor. The mother scrapes ice from a tin cup, hands red and raw. They endure without complaint. They continue on as if this hardship is normal. Scholars debate what this endurance really means. Some interpret it as evidence of heroic stubbornness, the human spirit refusing to yield even to the harshest cold. The cabin lies buried under snow, smoke drifting weakly from its chimney. Inside, frost clings stubbornly, a reminder that walls offer only a suggestion of protection against winter's command. And yet, the family survives, breathing, moving, even laughing softly, as ice forms in their cups. You pull the quilt closer, the cold biting at your skin, and feel the tension sharpen. Survival on the prairie was never a battle to win. It was a dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes awkward, always with frost close at hand. As you drift toward uneasy rest, the bucket of frozen water glimmers faintly, a quiet witness to endurance pressed to its limit. Yet, for now, your attention turns to the voices rising in its shadow. The storm rages outside, but inside another sound pushes back. Words, songs, and stories that fill the cabin with warmth no quilt or stove could provide alone. A truth often noted about frontier winters is that families pass the long nights not in silence but through storytelling and music. Tales were told and retold. Hymns hummed, fiddles plucked, voices lifted to drown the storm's roar. Entertainment was survival, a balm against fear and monotony. You close your eyes and hear it, the father's deep voice spinning a story, children chiming in, the mother's soft lullaby blending with the hiss of wind outside. Settlers often repeated the same handful of songs, until their melodies felt woven into the cabin itself. "Shall we gather at the river?" echoed as often as children's rhymes, serving the same purpose: rhythm, reassurance, the insistence that voices could reach farther than the cold. Imagine humming the same refrain night after night, its cadence becoming inseparable from the crackle of firewood. Scholars remain divided on the importance of these rituals. Some argue they built resilience, tying families together. Others claim they were fragile distractions, incapable of masking the relentless grind of winter. Listening now, you feel both truths, the warmth in children's laughter, the fatigue in a father's forced chuckle. The scene is textured and alive. The fiddle squeaks, its bow scraping unevenly, yet the sound glows in the small space. A child claps wooden spoons together, a hollow clack oddly cheerful. The mother's thin, cold voice contributes fragments of song. Outside, the storm murmurs faintly, unable to drown human defiance. One family diary offers a curious anecdote. Children invented storm dramas, acting out plays where snow was the villain and quilts served as shields. Laughter erupted at their own antics, parents watching with weary amusement. Picture a boy wrapped in a quilt, stomping like the blizzard itself, while his sister wields a broom like a sword, defending against him. Their giggles spark briefly, but brightly. Storytelling flowed naturally. Some nights, Bible verses were recited by candlelight, other nights, fathers recounted adventures from earlier travels, inflated into epics. Children begged for repetition, "Tell the bear's story again." With each retelling, humor or danger intensified to fit the mood. You lean in with them, eyes wide, caught between storm's dread and delight in the tale. The scent of tallow, candles dripping, mingles with smoke and damp wool. Pressing your quilt closer, you feel the voices weave above you. The stories stumble, wander, repeat, but they are alive, and that matters. Some researchers argue these moments show the frontier required not just physical but cultural survival. Music and myth held the cold at bay as much as wood and mud. Others caution against romanticizing, Noting journals often mention boredom, quarrels, and endlessly repeated tales. You sense that tension, the father's weary sigh beginning a familiar story, his children still eager. Another detail, one settler recalled using the Bible as a literal prop in games, balancing it on heads to see who could walk straight the longest. Faith, humor, necessity, all blurred in cramped space. Laughter echoed even as sacred words wobbled atop a child's curls. The storm raged outside, but the room pulsed with song. Hymns rose, clumsy but earnest, voices forming a fragile choir. When the last note faded, silence fell, broken only by wind. Yet this silence felt different. Less despair, more rest after exertion. A child whispered, "Will the storm ever end?" The mother hushed softly, smoothing hair, answering with a story of green spring grass, returning birds, rushing rivers. Half memory, half hope, yet the tale brought new warmth. You feel it, too, color against white, life against frost. Some historians suggest these small acts of imagination were as critical as fire itself. Others call them illusions, delaying confrontation with real hardship. Perhaps both are true. In this moment, though, you sense that without these stories, the walls would collapse inward, even if the logs held. Hours pass. Children doze mid-song, heads heavy on shoulders. The fiddle rests, bows slipping to the floor. Candles gutter low, shadows stretching. You remain under quilts, body warm, mind filled with echoes of hymns and laughter. Outside, wolves may circle, snow may climb, but inside, the storm becomes a backdrop for human voices. Dawn presses faintly at the greased paper windows. The storm lingers, but night has passed. Stories fade into memory, lingering like embers. You rise slowly, stretching stiff limbs, still hearing echoes of the night's chorus. For a moment, you feel lighter, as if words themselves stitched a new quilt around the family. Step outside in your imagination. Snow still covers the land, world still white and merciless. Yet smoke trails from the chimney. Life persists. Voices inside are weary, but hearts remain stitched together by song, story, and belief that humanity can speak louder than the storm. The echoes of song linger, but daylight brings a harsher truth. Music cannot fill empty stomachs. Stories do not split logs. And though the cabin stands, its walls rely on fuel to keep the stove glowing. You glance toward the woodpile in the corner. It has shrunk alarmingly since the last storm. The family's eyes follow it too. Every log burned is another tally in winter's slow countdown. One fact of frontier survival, the relentless hunger for fuel. A small stove consumed astonishing amounts of wood, sometimes daily in bitter weather. Families labored through autumn cutting, splitting, and stacking, yet often found themselves running short by midwinter. You imagine the father's back bent beneath an axe, breath misting in the cold. Each strike was labor and a promise of warmth. Journals record desperate measures, burning anything combustible when firewood ran low, broken furniture, wagon wheels, even books. One woman baked bread over the flames of a disassembled bed frame. Acrid smoke filled the air, pine and varnish curling in your throat, warmth bought at the cost of comfort. Scholars remain divided. Some argue shortages reflected poor planning. Others claim they show simply the unrelenting brutality of weather. Some insist careful settlers always stocked enough wood, yet nature often proved otherwise. Some argue that storms lasted longer and were colder than anyone could have predicted. That thought echoes in the hollow crack of a log on the chopping block. Was it skill or luck that kept people alive? Step closer. The woodpile is low, the corner shadowed. Each log is valuable, its bark flaking dry under your touch. The father lifts one, placing it on the stove. The sap hisses, loud in the quiet room. For a moment, warmth spreads, yet everyone watches the pile shrink. Children whisper, worried if there will be enough. No one answers. Listen. Outside, the axe strikes, muffled by snow. Wood splits with a sharp crack that cuts through the frozen air. The wind carries smoke from the chimney. Inside, the stove ticks as heat spreads through its iron shell. Simple sounds, yet each one holds a thread of survival. A rare story appears in a memoir, Settlers sometimes burned dried buffalo chips when wood ran out. The smell indoors was sharp, earthy, almost unbearable, yet it provided steady heat. Picture tossing such fuel into the stove, children covering their noses, smoke thick and bitter. You wrinkle your nose even now, yet feel relief as warmth returns. As fuel runs low, senses sharpen. The stove glows dimmer. Air chills faster. Frost returns to quilts. Breath fogs the room. Each log lifted whispers a countdown. Hunger presses not just for food but for fire. Some researchers describe firewood as the true currency of frontier winters, more valuable than money or trinkets. Others highlight settlers' ingenuity, burning whatever they could. You sit between these views, staring at the last few logs, realizing that both wealth and cleverness meet the same end. Picture the father trudging into snow waist-deep, axe over his shoulder. Boots sink, arms ache, yet he must cut more. Each axe strike echoes. Each split log is another heartbeat against the cold. Breath steams, sweat freezes on his collar, but he swings still. You stand beside him, hands blistering, body aching, but the pile grows slowly. Inside, the mother tends the fire carefully, feeding small sticks at a time, coaxing the flame rather than overloading it. Children huddle close, noses pink, hands outstretched. The scent of pine resin, the crackle of sap, warmth returns, momentarily. Danger is never far. Wet logs smoke heavily, choking the room. Sparks leap when resin ignites, threatening quilts hung too close. Outside, storms sometimes bury woodpiles, forcing families to dig out their fuel with bare hands. Imagine scraping snow from a frozen log, fingers numb, desperate to feed the stove. Settlers sometimes marked their woodpiles like monuments, stacking them carefully, measuring survival by the height of the stack. Children traced initials in the frost along them, as if claiming their families stand against winter. Picture such a pile now, a small mountain, glowing with faint promise. Night returns. The woodpile shrinks. Logs burn down to glowing coals. The family gathers, quilts drawn tight, breath visible in the dim. The father counts silently the days until green returns, until woodcutting is no longer a fight against death. Exhaustion is in his breath, yet so is resolve. Historians argue that firewood shortages embody the frontier spirit, endless labor, scarcity, yet unyielding endurance. Others say it shows nature's limits, impossible for humans to fully conquer. Both truths press in as you feel the weight of the axe and aching arms in your imagination. By morning, the pile has grown slightly, though never enough. The father returns, frost clinging to his beard. The mother stirs embers back to life. Children clap hands over the stove, cheeks pink, eyes hopeful. Chop, burn, ration, endure. The cycle continues. Step back. Smoke curls into the pale sky. Warmth holds fragilely, bought log by log. Outside, the prairie stretches endless, trees rare, storms constant. Fire is life, wood its currency. Survival is a ledger always on the edge of red. You pull the quilt closer, listening to the crackle, smelling pine and ash. The storm waits, but tonight, the stove glows. Tonight, the woodpile holds. Yet another truth presses close. Walls and warmth mean little without food. Bellies grumble louder than the wind. Survival depended not just on logs, but on larders. You turn to shelves holding jars, sacks, barrels, fragile memories of the autumn harvest. Frontier winters demanded months of food storage. Grain dried, corn shelled, vegetables pickled, meat salted or smoked. Hunger stalked quickly. Imagine opening a barrel, salted pork, pale, greasy, sharp with brine. Another sack holds gritty cornmeal, promising endless mush but little variety. Each item precious, rationed with care. Each spoonful a negotiation with winter's length. Diaries often mention meal monotony. Children begged for variety, yet parents offered none. One letter tells of a boy dreaming of apples all winter, waking to gray mush again. You almost taste it, thick, bland, filling, joyless. Scholars debate whether frontier diets sustained real health. Some say preserved foods supplied enough calories. Others point to scurvy, weakness, illness. You sense both as the family eats, bellies quieted, bodies weary, longing for green buried under snow. Step closer. Jars of pickled cucumbers, brine cloudy, lids sealed with wax. Sacks of beans, hard as stones until boiled. A crock of butter, surface darkened with salt. Each item recalls summer labor, planting, harvesting, preserving. Work of one season extending into the next. Every bite a reminder of fields under drifts. One settler journal notes families hung meat from rafters to protect it from mice. Imagine ham swinging overhead, smoke clinging, children swatting at dangling strips like piñatas. Comical, yet necessary. The ceiling doubled as pantry. The soundscape quiets. Stove hums, pot simmers, beans rattling faintly. Spoon scrapes bottom, steady rhythm. Children murmur as bowls pass, spoons clink against tin. Outside, storms moan. Inside, beans, salt, vinegar smell the air. Meals simple but fill the silence with comfort. Historians see stored food as ingenuity, transforming abundance into endurance. Others emphasize fragility, jars spoil, barrels rot, mice steal. You touch a jar's wax seal, brittle, wondering if it will last another month. Then there were treats, rare but memorable. Dried apples, leathery and sweet, saved for morale. A handful of molasses candy, sticky and bright, lifting children like sunlight. Imagine unwrapping such treasures in a world of salt and mush. Its sweetness was surprising, enough to make you laugh aloud. One girl recalled the taste of a single raisin for years. You let it dissolve slowly on your tongue, imagination stretching with every bite, joy compressed into a tiny morsel. An unusual fact, some settlers resorted to eating coffee grounds, boiled repeatedly until nothing remained but bitter sludge. Still, they clung to the ritual, sipping the dark liquid more for comfort than nourishment. Today, the taste is acrid and smoky, yet somehow it reassures you, proof that civilization, however fragile, persists at the bottom of a cup. The family eats quietly, spoons scraping bowls, steam rising. The mother measures portions carefully, each ladle precise. The children slurp eagerly, grateful even for bland mush. When the last bite is gone, bowls are wiped clean with scraps of bread. Nothing is wasted. Hunger may not be satisfied, but it is softened enough to endure another night. Scholars sometimes call frontier food edible time capsules, each jar and sack holding memories of seasons past. Others view them as fragile promises, easily lost to spoilage or theft. Both interpretations linger as you stare at the shelves, abundance frozen in glass, present hunger pressing harder with each day. Later, as the storm howls outside, the family unwraps one last treat, a pie made of dried apples, its crust brittle but fragrant. Spice fills the cabin. They cut it into thin slices, each piece savored slowly. Night deepens. The shelves seem emptier. A jar disappears, a sack grows lighter. The fire burns, yet food diminishes with each meal. You pull the quilt around your shoulders, listening to the faint hiss of the pot, the slow scrape of spoons, the storm's steady rhythm beyond. Step back in your mind. The cabin is both shelter and storehouse, walls holding not just bodies but the ghost of summer's harvest. Hunger waits inside like another storm, not measured in snow, but in empty jars. You feel the slow countdown of meals. Survival depends not just on heat, but on what you can swallow, chew, and stretch until the next day. With each passing day, the shelves grow barer. Though meals simmer on the stove, unease creeps in. What happens when the stores run out? Hunger prowls like a patient wolf outside the door. You sense it in the hush after supper, spoons set down, eyes drifting to the corners where sacks and jars once stood full. The blizzard is not only a battle of cold, it is a war of appetite. Frontier diaries reveal a sobering reality. Families often reach the edge of starvation during long winters. Rations dwindled, meals stretched thin, sometimes little more than hot water flavored with scraps. Picture a wooden bowl of broth made from a single bone, steam rising, yet offering little nourishment. Still, they drank, because hope tastes like something even when the belly remains hollow. Some families foraged even in deep snow. They dug frozen turnips from fields, scraped bark for edible inner layers, or boiled pine needles into bitter, vitamin-rich tea. Kneeling in the snow, fingers numb, searching the frozen earth for survival, what may taste like dirt still meant life. Historians debate how often outright starvation occurred. Some argue careful planning kept settlers alive. Others point to letters of desperation, families wasting away. As you sit near the stove, stomach tightening, the truth seems somewhere in between. Not all starved, yet hunger lingered as a constant, whispering presence. The sensory world shifts here. The pot no longer smells rich, only the faint aroma of thin beans and scarce grease. Bowls clink. Spoons scrape every drop. Children lick rims, eyes wide with craving. Even the dog watches hungrily, ribs showing, tail wagging faintly at crumbs. One unusual memoir recalls a family boiling leather strips from harnesses into a foul-tasting soup. Chewing soggy leather, teeth aching, they swallowed because the alternative was worse. Absurd, grotesque, but desperation has no dignity. Scholars debate, folklore exaggeration or grim reality. Either way, the weight of hunger presses in your chest. The storm rages outside, but inside the cabin, the sounds are wood cracking, stomachs rumbling, a child whimpering for more. The mother strokes hair, whispering promises she may not keep. The father stares at shelves, worry etched in his face. Each silence between breaths feels louder than the blizzard beyond. Yet ingenuity surfaces. Families stretched flour with corn husks, ground bitter acorns into edible flour, melted icicles into weak, sugared tea. Faint sweetness after weeks of bland salt and starch felt miraculous. Letters describe snow pancakes, flour mixed with melted snow, fried without eggs or milk. Thin, tasteless, yet filling. Imagine a mother flipping these cakes, children cheering as if it were a feast. Historians debate the accuracy of these tales. Were they cautionary stories or grim realities? Either way, you feel the weight of hunger, more persistent than wolves, deeper than cold. Even amid scarcity, families found ways to hold on. One breaks a single piece of bread into 6 parts. Each crumb savored, eyes closing as though tasting cake. A child giggles, delirium or joy. Survival relied not only on filling stomachs, but keeping spirits alive. Night falls. Bellies rumble, breath fogs, quilts weigh heavy. The father tells of spring, of seeds and green fields. Children drift to sleep with visions of harvest, hunger temporarily softened by hope. Recollections show that many remembered these winters with grim pride, sharing endurance as badges of survival etched into memory. By dawn, the shelves are lighter. The storm is relentless outside, yet inside grows a different storm, hollow stomachs and restless minds. Still, the stove glows. The family rises, facing another day. Step back. The cabin stands small against endless white. Hunger presses close, shaping every moment. Yet voices rise, children stir, parents endure. Life persists, stubborn and fragile, waiting for the return of abundance. Not every family relied solely on stored food. Some ventured into the blizzard with rifles or traps. Icy wind cuts as a man pulls his hat low, gun over shoulder. Risky but essential. Without it, the pot stays empty. Winter hunting was dangerous but sometimes life-saving. Deer, rabbits, grouse, and prairie chickens could be found even in storms. Tracks in snow guided men for miles. Some families set deadfall traps just outside the cabin. Children wrote of waking to a springing trap, breakfast waiting in the snow, a trembling rabbit, relief sharp yet tempered by grim necessity. Scholars debate, did hunting reliably sustain families, or did storms render game scarce? Both truths exist. Hours in cold, eyes stinging, returning empty-handed, the cabin greets you, but hunger scolds louder than the storm. The hunting world is stark. Air sharp, snow squeaks, the forest smells faintly of pine and musk. Rifle held tightly, fingers numb, eyes scanning for motion against white. One anecdote tells of a grouse buried in snow, startled by the hunter, bringing rare stew to the family, feathers drifting like snowflakes, broth thick and rich. Rifle cracks in the distance. Dogs bark. Children press ears to windows, anxious. Will the hunter return with food or empty hands? Historians frame such hunts as heroism or desperate gambles. Both feel real. A pulse-leaping rabbit, a deer flicking its tail, a shot fired, sometimes success, sometimes failure, the weight returning home heavy or empty. Inside, outcomes are clear. Meat means bubbling stew, children laughing, grease on lips. No meat, and supper is thin, spoons scraping bowls. Community sometimes helped. Neighbors shared meat when they had extra. Other times, survival demanded secrecy. Generosity collided with necessity. An unusual note, settlers ate animals we would now consider unthinkable. Survival stretched imagination and stomach alike. Porcupine, crow, even skunk. Letters describe the smells as almost unbearable. Yet meat is meat. Imagine swallowing such a stew, nose pinched, yet grateful for the warmth spreading through your belly. Hunger quickly reshapes what we call food. Outside, the storm rages. In your mind, the hunter finally returns, boots heavy with ice, rifle slung across his back. He drops a deer hide with a thud, steam rising from its frosted fur. Children cheer. The mother weeps with relief. Knives flash. Meat simmers. The cabin fills with an aroma rich enough to almost erase despair. You breathe it in, warmth spreading, and feel life tighten its hold again. Some scholars note that these rare moments of bounty became stories retold for generations. Others caution against romanticizing them, pointing out that for every successful hunt, another ended in failure. You stand between these views, tasting stew that feels miraculous while remembering nights of empty bowls. Dawn arrives pale and cruel. The hunter sharpens his knife, preparing for another venture. Children scrape bones clean. Dogs get no scraps, shelves remain nearly bare. Food taken from the storm's teeth is always temporary. Yet for one night, the pot was full, laughter returned, and warmth prevailed. Step back in your mind. The cabin is no fortress, yet inside, fire glows, stew simmers, voices rise. Beyond the walls, snow stretches endlessly. Prey hides. Predators circle. Survival here isn't just planning or storing. It is daring the storm to yield its meager gifts. Hunger will return tomorrow, but tonight the family eats, and for a few hours, the storm does not rule. The stew pot lingers in your imagination, steam thick and fragrant, yet meat never lasts long with hungry mouths. By the next day, scraps vanish, shelves look bare once more. Then families relied on the simplest provisions: flour, cornmeal, and flatbreads that carried them through nights of emptiness. Step closer to the stove. The mother lifts a pan, dusts it with meal, and stirs batter as thin as water. Frontier bread was rarely golden and yeasted. Often, it was dense, flat, or gritty, made with sourdough starters carefully kept alive, sometimes passed down generations. These bubbling starters could mean the difference between empty tables and a filling meal. Imagine dipping your hand into the sour, earthy mixture. When flour ran scarce, settlers improvised. Cornmeal mush, or Johnny cake, was poured onto griddles and eaten with just salt. Sometimes dough baked directly in coals, wrapped in leaves, or slapped onto embers, scraped later with bits of charcoal clinging. Pull one free, blackened crust, gummy interior, grit in your teeth, but every bite is a blessing. Historians debate whether these breads fully sustained settlers. Some say the dense calories fueled endless labor. Others argue malnutrition was inevitable. You taste this contradiction as you chew the imagined ash cake. The sounds of bread making are simple but steady: a wooden spoon scraping a tin bowl, dough hissing on hot iron, flour puffing onto rough boards. Children hover, noses twitching, eyes following every motion. Hunger isn't for luxury, but for warmth and something to chew. Letters reveal a family mixing flour with grated dried pumpkin, stretching bread while adding faint sweetness. They laughed at its odd flavor but ate anyway. Picture biting into it, odd texture, faintly sweet, a small reminder of harvest. The mother flips a corn cake onto a plate, steam rising, edges crisp, middle heavy. Children grab eagerly, fingers burning, crumbs scattering across quilts. You chew with them, warmth spreading slowly inside. Some scholars see these crude breads as symbols of adaptation, scarcity transformed into survival. Others note how monotonous diets wore down morale, bread becoming a chore rather than comfort. Both views linger as you sit at the table, chewing slowly, tasting gratitude through fatigue. When settlers had molasses or honey, they stretched each drop across a week, savoring it as treasure. Imagine your tongue chasing the last trace on a plate. Bread smells faintly smoky, bitter from coals. Texture is coarse, sometimes sticky, teeth grinding through grit. Yet warmth fills your belly, silencing despair for a few hours. The fire crackles, pan hisses, children laugh with mouths full. Outside, the storm rages, but indoors, bread is victory. Thin, bland, blackened, it doesn't matter. It proves there is still something to eat. Some historians suggest bread was more ritual than nourishment, anchoring families in the rhythm of meals. Others see it as sheer survival. Both perspectives hold as you break a loaf for a child, watching their eyes light up at the smallest gift. Night deepens. More dough is mixed, poured, baked. Children sleep with crumbs on their lips, the smell of flour in their hair. The mother wipes the bowl clean. Nothing is wasted. Fire burns lower, bellies lined with dense bread, buying one more night of endurance. Diaries record children pretending ash cakes were pies, naming them after fruits unseen that year. Apple pie. A girl giggles, chewing blackened crust. Laughter flavors the meal more than any spice. Morning comes pale and hard. Cornmeal sacks are lighter, sourdough jars nearly empty, yet another batch of cakes is mixed. Another day's hunger postponed. The cycle feels endless, but so does their will. Step back. The cabin smells of smoke and bread, walls steeped in grit and grease. Shelves sparse, sacks half empty. Still, the pan hisses, fire glows, hands reach for one more cake. On the frozen prairie, survival is small, stubborn meals that keep hearts beating. Tonight, bread is enough. Even as bellies rest, another worry creeps in, sickness. Close quarters, smoke thick, damp quilts, illness spreads silently. Imagine a mother dipping a cloth in vinegar for fever, steeping pine needles for coughs. Some settlers pressed onion slices to chests or smeared goose grease to ward off chills. Absurd yet often life-saving. Researchers debate effectiveness. Some say teas warded off scurvy, others argue hope mattered more than cure. You sip an imagined bitter tea, warmth spreading despite uncertainty. The cabin smells of damp wool, vinegar, grease, smoke. Quilts rustle as children turn in restless sleep, cheeks flushed with fever. Hands press foreheads. Contrast with the frost outside is stark. Letters recall hot bricks at children's feet, melted snow mixed with molasses, comfort for bitter throats. Children giggle even while coughing. By morning, fever eases. Relief spreads. Stove burns on. Storm continues. Inside, faith and ingenuity keep life moving. Days stretch long. Storms prolong isolation. Boredom breeds restlessness, frayed tempers, cabin fever. Families quarrel over trifles. Who tended the fire, who wasted flour, whose snore rattled loudest. Confined weeks in one room, mind turns inward. Some scheduled tasks or story hours to keep spirits moving. Picture inventing a tale while snow piles against the door, words stammering, not clever, but life-affirming. Scholars debate whether cabin fever was more psychological or physical. Isolation, poor light, bad air, monotonous diet, all converge. You sense both as you watch restless figures under quilts, eyes too bright, voices too sharp. Smoke stings, yet laughter bursts through. A deck of cards, shadow games, riddles, dogs chasing tails. Small joys stave off despair. Survival is not just physical, spirit must endure. Oddly, superstition lingers. Whistling indoors during storms invited bad luck, silence sometimes enforced. Some historians argue such rituals distinguished enduring families. Others credit chance. Either way, you feel the truth. Survival is as much mental as it is physical. Night drags, candles burn low, children whisper secrets, parents lie awake, listening to storm and their thoughts pressing hard. Dawn comes pale and gray. Cabin hums with life again. Quarrels fade, laughter returns, chores resume, tallies carved deeper into logs. Another day endured, another step into winter's march. The cabin is fragile, pressed by snow and silence. Yet voices rise. Games play. Laughter sparks. Cabin fever hovers but does not break them. Survival is fire, food, and keeping hearts from freezing. Even as storms rage, visitors sometimes arrive, neighbors seeking shelter. Small cabins become havens. Diaries recount bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, breath clouding thick air. Wolves circle, drawn by livestock, claws scratching at doors. Scholars debate frequency, either way, fear sharpens imagination. Inside, air grows hot with crowded bodies, breath dampening quilts. The scent of sweat and damp will mixes with smoke inside the cabin. Outside, the air is sharp and metallic, pierced by the howl of the wind drifting across the snow. Every sound matters. The creak of the latch, claws scraping, boots thudding as a neighbor collapses inside. One unusual account survives in a settler's letter. On a bitter night, a panicked, half-frozen horse burst through a cabin door, knocking over the stove before it could be calmed. Imagine the chaos: smoke, sparks, screaming children, the animal shivering and steaming, filling the cabin with the smells of sweat and frost. For hours, the family sat wide-eyed, cautious of their massive, unexpected guest. Then comes the knock at the door, hesitant, muffled by snow, a faint voice calling for help. The father pauses, hand on the latch, torn between generosity and caution. Opening it risks more than strangers. It invites cold, wind, and perhaps worse. Yet finally, the door swings open. A figure stumbles in, half-frozen, eyes wide with gratitude. Quilts are draped over shoulders, hot broth pressed into shaking hands. Relief fills the room, but so does tension. More mouths to feed, more bodies to crowd the fragile space. Some historians view these sudden visits as evidence of frontier community spirit, neighbors supporting one another in storms. Others emphasize the strain, resources thin, tempers sharper. Both truths clash in the cabin. Voices overlap, warmth shared uneasily. Children sometimes enjoyed the interruptions. A diary recalls a boy bursting with excitement when a traveler handed out peppermint candies. Sharp sweetness in a winter of bland porridge, a fleeting miracle. Not all intrusions were human. Mice and rats swarmed in warmth, gnawing on stores, scuttling across sleeping forms. One mother wrote of waking to find a mouse curled in her bonnet, revulsions softened by absurdity. Storms pressed everyone close, even the smallest invaders. The cabin became a stage of constant interruption. A wolf's howl froze everyone in silence. A knock brought neighbors in, faces pale. Footprints revealed creatures circling through the night. Every sound was magnified, a question: friend, foe, or wind? Researchers suggest this constant vigilance shaped frontier psychology. Never truly alone, never truly safe. Yet others note it created bonds. Humans and animals, neighbors and strangers, all part of the same storm-driven web. In the cabin, fear and fellowship coexist. Night deepens. Strangers huddle on the floor. Children sleep against neighbors' knees. The stove glows, shared among too many bodies. Gratitude hums in the air. Outside, wolves pad silently, eyes glinting. The storm blurs everything into a chorus of wind, howls, snores, coughs, and laughter. You lie under your quilt, realizing survival is never solitary. Folklore recalls that wolves could approach only if the fire burned low. True or not, the lesson stuck. Fathers rise repeatedly to feed the stove. Mothers whisper that the fire keeps monsters away. You watch the embers glow and sense the truth in their superstition. Dawn breaks. Neighbors rise stiffly, thanking hosts, trudging back into snow. The cabin feels larger, emptier. Shelves lighter, fire weaker, but the bond of shared survival lingers. Wolf tracks remain, half filled with snow, reminders of uninvited visitors. The cabin is more than shelter. It is a stage where strangers, animals, and storms play their parts. Inside, warmth is shared uneasily but gratefully. Outside, predators wait. Through it all, the family survives, weaving company and threat into their long winter story. The storm's silence can be as dangerous as its rage. Snowdrifts pressed high, sometimes sealing cabins entirely. Letters describe roofs creaking, windows buried, doors frozen shut. Families lit candles at midday because no daylight entered. Some settlers turned this into advantage. Snow walls insulated cabins, muffling howls outside. One woman wrote that silence inside was so complete she could hear her children's hearts beating. Safety and fear, comfort and danger, intertwined. A diary recounts a family digging a tunnel through the chimney when snow blocked the door. They emerged into daylight like moles, laughing with panic. You imagine pushing through damp snow, lungs gulping icy air, relief surging through every nerve. Snow shifts above, a log cracks under pressure. A child whimpers. The mother hushes them, eyes darting upward. Some scholars argue the psychological strain of being sealed in was worse than the physical danger. Others emphasize practicality. Snowbound cabins survived storms better. Both truths press on your chest as you breathe under dim candlelight. Families improvised to pass time. Children traced stars and trees on frosted walls, small rebellions against endless white. Daily rhythms changed. Wood rationed, snow melted for water, fire tended constantly. Smoke thickened, walls dripped, quilts felt damp. The storm had moved inside. Yet families adapted, playing hibernation games, teaching children to see snow as cocoon, not coffin. Giggles cut through parental dread. Night inside a snowbound cabin was uncanny. Silence dominated, broken only by firewood snapping and snow shifting. Sleep came uneasy. Historians see these moments as proof of human adaptability, or reminders of the thin line between life and death. You feel both judgments pressing as you breathe shallowly among too many bodies. Dawn eventually arrives. Light seeps through cracks. The father pushes the door open. A rush of fresh air floods in. Children gasp, laugh. The cabin exhales. Smoke clears. Walls drip less. For a moment, the world seems possible again. Outside, drifts rise higher than the roofline, yet life flickers inside. Candles, fire, breath, laughter. Survival meant enduring as if buried, waiting until the storm gave way. The snow loosens. Horizon glows faintly. You imagine stepping out, boots crunching ice, lungs filling with sharp air. The family has endured wood, bread, sickness, hunger, silence, and songs. The prairie begins to breathe again. Winters did not last forever, blizzards eventually broke. Early sunlight brought small celebrations, candy unwrapped, songs sung, flour baked into victory cakes. Relief and danger coexisted. The storm passed, but struggle continued. The sensory shift is striking. Snowbound silence replaced by dripping water, breaking icicles, groaning earth. Air smells wet, raw alive. Children race barefoot in puddles, laughter echoing. Wind softens, birds call, dogs bark. The stove ticks less desperately. The house feels like a survivor rather than a prison. Some scholars argue this moment of relief tested families' resolve to stay on the frontier. Others suggest enduring one winter rooted them permanently. The smell of thawing earth feels intoxicating, sacred. The family steps outside. Father's beard drips, mother spreads arms, children throw snow at one another. Raw joy floods the prairie. Hardships remain, empty shelves, low wood, but survival feels meaningful. Scars and wear mark their bodies, but beneath glows enduring strength. Night comes, stars sharp above, cabin warm with relief. Voices murmur, laughter breaks softly. Sleep comes easier. You pull your quilt close in peace, listening to dripping snow as a lullaby. The cabin stands firm, snow receding slowly, earth ready to bloom. Inside, a family rests alive. The storm has passed, but memory lingers. You have walked through storms, felt frost, smelled smoke, tasted ash cakes, heard coughs and laughter. Still, you remain wrapped in survival's quiet, listening to steady breaths. Stars spread light across the prairie. Seeds lie asleep under snow, spring certain to come. The family rests, bodies heavy with earned peace. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, let thoughts slow. The storm has passed. The cabin is safe. You're safe to drift gently, wrapped in quilts of smoke and wool, toward dreams where winter melts into spring's quiet promise.